The wind tonight smells of pine and distant ash, like a fire forgotten too long in the forest, smoldering beneath fallen needles. Can you hear it? That faint rustle, the low hush of branches sighing in the dusk. Let your eyes rest as the night gathers. Let your breath slow, like the soft pull of a rising tide. The story waits by the fire's glow, and the shadows are ready to speak. In the year 864, in a small settlement nestled between the fjords of Hordaland, the snow had not yet come, but the sky held its breath. The gulls wheeled low over the dark water, and somewhere beyond the hills, wolves threaded their way through thinning trees. In a longhouse near the water's edge, a woman stirred a heavy pot of barley stew. Her hands were knotted with age, but steady, and her back was wrapped in lamb's wool dyed the color of dried blood. Her name was Yngvild. She had lived through 5 kings and 3 bad winters. Her fingers had felt the bones of dying sheep and the pulses of birthing women. She was not priestess, not jarl, not servant. She was simply called Viskona, wise woman. And that name, whispered in homes or muttered by warriors, was both prayer and warning. Children dared each other to run past her longhouse. Men brought their wounded sons to her, but would not meet her eyes. And the women? The women watched her with something deeper than fear. It was the kind of reverence you give to a storm that might turn your boat, or a cliff you must pass on the narrow path. On this evening, as crows settled into the spruce trees and night curled its fingers along the earth, a knock came at Yngvild's door. She did not turn. She had heard the girl's footsteps for half an hour, slow, hesitant, crunching across the frozen moss. The girl was called Asa. She was 17 and quiet, with the dark eyes of her mother and the careful movements of someone who had already buried too much. Her voice, when it came, was a hush. "My sister won't stop bleeding," she said. "My mother sent me." Yngvild said nothing. She stirred the stew once more, let the steam rise. Then, after a time that felt like a long-held breath, she wiped her hands on a rough cloth and gathered a bundle of herbs, a small bone needle, and something wrapped in deerskin. "Come," she said, and Asa followed. They walked in silence toward the girl's longhouse, past the drying racks and the frozen stream. The night was full of brittle stars, and the northern lights flickered faintly at the edge of the sky. When they reached the house, Yngvild did not knock. She stepped through the threshold like smoke and knelt by the sickbed without waiting for invitation. The girl on the bed was pale, her lips cracked, and her belly swelled slightly despite her thinness. A miscarriage, Yngvild knew at once, and not her first. She lit a small tallow lamp, opened her pouch, and began to work, murmuring in low tone, crushing roots with her fingers, placing heat stones at the girl's feet. Asa watched from the corner, her hands clenched. After an hour, the bleeding slowed. The girl slept, and Yngvild sat back on her heels. "She will live," she said. Her voice was flat, but not unkind. "If she is kept warm, if she drinks the broth I leave you, if the gods are not looking elsewhere." Asa bowed her head. "My mother thanks you." But when Yngvild turned to leave, she paused. Her gaze rested not on the sleeping girl, but on a woven cloth at the foot of the bed. The pattern was old, too old. Threads shaped like serpents, biting their own tails, like moons splitting in half. "You kept this," Yngvild said softly, "even after they burned the others." Asa didn't answer. She was staring at the hearth. That night, Yngvild walked home beneath the aurora, her breath curling like ghost ribbons in the cold. And as she walked, the memories came, not in words, but in sensations. The scent of burning wool, the scream of a friend dragged from her home, the way her own mother's voice had cracked when they tore her herb pouch away. Have you ever wondered what it felt like to carry knowledge that others feared? To walk among your own people and feel their backs stiffen When you passed, once, long ago, before the Jarls grew wary and the new priests came from across the sea, wise women like Yngvild had been honored. They had sat at the high seats beside chiefs, consulted before voyages, buried with silver and stone. But that time was gone. Now, even as their poultices healed wounds and their charms protected newborns, suspicion festered like a boil beneath the skin of the village. Yngvild knew this. She had known it for decades. Still, she kept her longhouse near the edge of the settlement, close enough to hear when the screams began, but far enough that no one would see the flames at night when she burned the old runes into driftwood, whispering names she dared not say aloud. The next morning, when the frost clung to the eaves like cobwebs, a man came to her door. His beard was streaked with gray, and he carried a carved staff, more for show than for walking. His name was Thorbjorn, and he sat on the council. "You healed the girl," he said. "You used bloodroot and iron." "I did," Yngvild answered, not rising. "That's not the way our priest teaches." "I am not your priest." Thorbjorn's jaw tightened. He stepped back, then said, almost too softly, "Be careful, old one. The people are watching. They forget kindness quickly when fear comes near." She nodded, not in submission, but in understanding. After he left, she fed the fire and sat by the door, grinding dried lichen between her palms. Outside, the crows had begun circling again. In the days that followed, Asa came back. Not once, but many times. First to fetch more broth, then to return a wooden bowl, then simply to sit in silence, watching Yngvild mix herbs or sort seeds or mend her cloak. On the sixth visit, Yngvild handed her a stone with a hole in the middle. "For your sister," she said. "Hang it near the door. It keeps dreams from leaving too fast." Asa turned it over in her hands, her brow furrowed. "You speak as if dreams are living things." "They are," said Yngvild. "They carry the things we forget to feel." That night, a strange silence spread across the village. A hunting party returned early, empty-handed. The fishers found nothing in their nets. And at midnight, a baby cried and would not stop, even as his mother rocked him until her arms shook. In the longhouse, Yngvild sat very still. The wind had shifted. Something was coming, and it was not the snow. The morning arrived with a sky the color of wet wool, thick and heavy above the fjord. The frost had deepened overnight, and the ground crackled under every step like thin ice cracking on a pond. Far off, a raven called out, its voice sharp and ancient, echoing through the stillness like a warning no one wanted to hear. "Listen closely now. Let the cold wrap around your shoulders like a cloak. Let your breath mingle with the mist. We are not walking into fear, but into memory, into the slow, burning truth that lives beneath silence." Yngvild rose before the light touched the treetops. She always did. "Old bones woke early," she used to say, "and the dead slept longer than the living." She ground her herbs by the doorway where the air was cleanest, her fingers steady despite the ache in her wrists. The bundle she prepared was small today: willow bark, dried nettle, powdered mushroom, and a pinch of meadowsweet. It was not for pain, but for clarity. A man would come seeking it before the sun touched the roof beams. He always came after a bad dream, though he never said so aloud. There was a rhythm to it all, like the tide. The people feared her, yes, but they needed her too. One by one, they came when illness crept in, or birth came too early, or their dead would not sleep. They came with coin, with silence, sometimes with meat, and they always left with their heads down, as if shame had followed them to her doorstep. She had learned not to expect thanks. But Asa was different. That morning, the girl came again. Her breath rose in quick puffs, her cheeks pink from the cold. She did not bring coin or a task. Instead, she held out a bundle wrapped in wool, a small loaf of oat bread, and a sliver of goat cheese. "You haven't eaten since yesterday," she said simply. Yngvild took the gift, but did not speak for a moment. Instead, she gestured for the girl to sit. The silence between them was soft now, no longer strained. Asa had begun to ask questions, careful ones, about plants, about bones, about how dreams sometimes spoke in symbols. Today she asked, "Why do they hate you?" Yngvild lifted her eyes. Outside, the raven called again. Inside, the fire popped softly. "They don't hate me," she said. "They fear what I remember." Asa frowned. "But remembering isn't wrong." Yngvild smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "No, it isn't. But when men change the story, they prefer silence from those who still know the old one." She set the loaf aside and reached for a small wooden bowl carved with curling patterns, not unlike the ones on the cloth Asa's mother kept hidden. Inside were small bones, polished smooth, and 3 black stones. She rolled them gently in her palm, then tipped them onto the table. One landed with its hollow side facing up. "Someone will come before dusk," Yngvild said, not as a warning, but as fact. "And he will not be seeking healing." Asa looked at the stones, then at her. "Should I tell my mother?" Yngvild shook her head. "No, but stay home tonight and keep your fire burning." That afternoon, the village turned restless. Dogs barked at nothing. A woman cried out when a log cracked too loudly in her hearth. And near the temple, a boy claimed to have seen a white fox darting between the stones. "A bad sign," they whispered. "The gods do not send foxes without reason." Just before dusk, the man came. He was tall, wrapped in wolfskin, with a heavy axe slung across his back. His name was Eric, and he had not spoken to Yngvild in years. Not since she had failed to save his youngest brother from drowning in a fever. He did not knock. He stepped through the doorway like it was his own. "I need a charm," he said, "for strength, for war." Yngvild did not rise from her stool. "There is no war." "There will be." He dropped a bundle of silver rings on her table. She did not touch them. "Strength does not come from bones," she said. "It comes from what you protect." Eric leaned closer, and the air around him smelled of smoke and iron. "Then give me something for fear, so it leaves me." She met his eyes. "Fear does not leave," she said. "It changes shape." For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with a motion too fast for thought, he knocked the bowl of bones to the floor. The stones scattered. The fire hissed as one rolled into the coals. "You are poison," he said. Yngvild did not flinch. "And yet," she replied quietly, "you came." That night, the village did not sleep well. The crows did not settle. The wind howled down the fjord like a wounded thing. And at the edge of the settlement, a child claimed he saw fire in the woods. Fire with no smoke. By morning, the story had grown. Some said Yngvild had cursed Eric. Others said she had whispered to the foxes and called the wind. A few even claimed she had once flown in a storm, her cloak trailing like wings. The elders met in hushed tones. The priest from the west offered a solution. "Fire," he said. "Fire purifies." Asa heard the murmurs. Her mother, pale with fear, tried to keep her inside. But Asa waited until nightfall, then slipped out into the dark, her breath hitching as she ran toward the old longhouse. Yngvild was waiting by the door. "I know," she said. "They've chosen." Asa stepped closer, tears stinging. "You have to leave." "I did leave," Yngvild said softly. "Once. Many years ago. And I came back. I always come back." The girl's hands trembled. "I don't want you to die." "Then listen," said the old woman, placing a bundle in Asa's hands. "Keep this, learn from it. Never use it to harm." "What is it?" "Memory," she said, "and promise." By dawn, the longhouse was empty. Some said she had fled to the hills. Others said she had turned into a raven and flown away. Only Asa knew the truth, though even she could not speak it aloud. Because that night, as she watched from the forest edge, the flames rose high. But no screams followed, only silence, and the faint sound of wind weaving through the pines, whispering names too old to remember. There is a sound only winter knows. The soft hush of snowfall meeting bark, of frozen branches creaking under their own memory. Can you hear it now? A silence so thick it becomes a presence, lingering at the threshold like an unseen guest. Close your eyes, if you wish, and follow the hush. We walk deeper now, where fear and memory live side by side. The morning after the fire, the village wore the stillness of a funeral. Smoke clung to the trees, and ash curled in the wind like the ghost of something not yet done mourning. The longhouse was gone. Only blackened stones marked its place, and a patch of earth too warm beneath the frost. Children were not allowed near it. Mothers hushed them sharply when they asked questions. The priest said little, save to nod and mutter that justice had been served, and that the gods would now grant peace. But peace did not come. By midday, the wind had turned again. Sharp and biting, it howled down from the northern hills, carrying with it a dry, sour scent that made the dogs whimper and crawl beneath carts. An old man slipped on the icy dock and shattered his hip. A goat gave birth to a kid with one eye, which bleated once and died. In the hall, where the council gathered, a crack split the wooden beam that had stood for 2 generations. Some shook their heads and said it was the season. Others remembered Yngvild's words, the last she had spoken in public, and did not speak them aloud. Asa said nothing. She stayed inside her family's home, helping her mother prepare dried meat and binding wool cords for trade. But her mind stayed elsewhere. The bundle Yngvild had given her, wrapped in faded cloth and tied with a knot that felt more like a seal than a ribbon, sat beneath her bed, untouched. She had not yet dared to open it. That night, she dreamed of the longhouse, whole and bright, with herbs hanging from the beams and light pooling like honey on the floor. She saw Yngvild sitting by the fire, not aged or bent, but young, her hair dark, her hands clean and unscarred. The woman turned to her and smiled, though her mouth did not move. "Remember what is buried," she said. "It waits." Asa woke with the dream still clinging to her like a shawl. She lit a candle and sat at the edge of her bed, listening to the wind outside. Then, with fingers that trembled only slightly, she untied the bundle. Inside were 3 things: a pouch of dried herbs, a scrap of deerskin inked with runes, and a carved pendant, smooth and cool, shaped like a crescent moon held between 2 leaves. On the back of the pendant was a single mark, not a rune. A symbol older than that, one she had only seen scratched faintly in the earth behind Yngvild's house. A spiral within a spiral, open at the edge, like a breath half drawn. She stared at it for a long time. Then she wrapped the items again and placed them deep in her mother's chest, beneath bolts of cloth and dried lavender. And she said nothing, even to herself. But something had shifted. As the weeks passed, the snow came in heavy blankets, burying the land in quiet. Men hunted, women gathered firewood, and the priest began preaching more often, louder, longer, his voice urgent. He spoke of purity, of obedience, of danger lurking among them. He did not name names. He did not need to. Still, the sickness came. It began with the livestock. Sheep refusing to eat, then foaming at the mouth. Then the children, one after another, falling into strange fevers that did not break for days. Asa's cousin began sleepwalking, waking each morning with bloody scratches on his arms. A merchant's wife claimed she saw a shadow pass through the smoke of her hearth, though the door had been locked and barred. Whispers followed, as they always did. Some blamed the gods, some blamed the weather. Some began to wonder if the wise woman had ever truly died. Asa felt it too, a pull, a stirring under her skin. She began to walk the woods more often, at first for firewood, then for the quiet. The trees felt closer now, as if they were listening. And once, While kneeling to gather dried moss near the roots of a pine, she heard something faint, a hum, not unlike a lullaby, threading itself between the branches. She stood very still, then turned and went home. That night, she asked her mother a question, not directly, but close enough. "Did you ever know someone," she said, "who healed without being thanked?" Her mother looked up from her sewing. "Yes," she said, "but they did not do it for thanks." Asa nodded slowly. "Then why?" Her mother hesitated. Her voice, when it came, was low. "Because some burdens are lighter when shared." The next morning, Asa gathered the bundle again. She walked beyond the edge of the village, where the path narrowed between stones crusted with old lichen. The ravens circled high above, and the sky had that strange light of days when the snow might fall or not. She followed a path no longer walked, one that led past the old stone well and the stump where a sacred tree had once stood, cut down now, burned during the last priest's arrival. At the base of the stump, she sat. She placed the pendant on her palm, not to use, not yet, but simply to feel its weight. And there, in the hush, something old rose to meet her. It was not a voice. It was not language. It was the memory of the earth beneath the longhouse floor. Of fire lit with breath instead of flint. Of songs sung not for joy, but for remembering. She stayed until dusk. When she returned, her hands were stained with crushed leaves, and her breath carried the scent of pine sap and something else, something wild. That evening, her mother did not ask questions, but her eyes lingered longer on Asa's face, and when they sat to eat, she reached out once and touched her daughter's hand. A quiet understanding passed between them. In the days that followed, Asa changed, not quickly, not all at once, but steadily. She began tending the sick when no one else would. A boy with frostbite, a woman coughing blood, an old man whose bones ached too sharply to walk. She never claimed knowledge. She never charged coin, but her hands moved with growing certainty, and her eyes looked inward as often as outward. Some turned their backs. Others came at dusk, when the priest could not see. They brought offerings, not silver, but bread, broth, a carved wooden comb, and in return they received small poultices, whispered advice, and once a charm of nettle strung on flax thread meant to be hung above a cradle. The whispers returned, but they were softer now, less of fear, more of wonder. Still, Asa knew what Yngvild had known, that knowing too much, too soon, was dangerous. That power, when quiet, could grow like roots, strong, unseen, patient. And as the snow melted into early spring, and the river began to flow again beneath its ice, the trees began to bend toward her steps, not because she commanded them, but because they remembered. Tonight, the moon rests low, pale as bone, behind a veil of thin cloud. The earth is softening beneath the snow melt, and somewhere in the dark woods, owls call to each other in long, echoing notes. Settle in now. Let your mind loosen like thawing roots in the forest floor. We are returning to a place where silence listens, where memory gathers like fog above a mossy field. The spring came late that year. Frost clung longer than it should have to the edges of roofs and stones. Ice still gripped the inner pools of the river when the sheep gave birth. But with the thaw came something new. Not loud, not sudden, but steady. A quiet shift. People still came to Asa. Not many, not publicly, but they came. A grandmother whose joints would not bend without pain. A boy who had not spoken since his father vanished in a snowstorm. A girl with eyes so wide and strange they said she'd been touched by spirits. Asa said little to them. She asked questions instead, listened more than she spoke. And when she did give advice, it was gentle, Chew these roots before bed. Leave this stone by the fire. Drink only from the well for 3 days. And slowly, things changed. The grandmother walked again, though with a cane. The boy began humming to himself, then speaking in whispers. And the wide-eyed girl? She stopped biting her fingers and began drawing on pieces of bark. Spirals, fish, eyes. People noticed. They didn't say it aloud, but they knew. One night, Asa came home to find a small basket at her door. Inside, eggs, a strip of dried cod, and a folded piece of birch bark with no writing, only a mark, a spiral. Her mother said nothing, but her eyes lingered a little longer than usual on the bundle when Asa brought it inside. Days passed, then weeks. Spring blossomed into early summer. The birds returned to the forest. The river's voice grew bolder, threading through the valley like a song half remembered. Wildflowers opened their faces to the sun, and the scent of damp earth drifted over everything. Still, Asa did not wear the pendant. It remained hidden, wrapped in cloth, and tucked into the hollow of a pine stump outside the village. She did not yet feel worthy of it, or perhaps she feared what would change once she claimed it fully. But others noticed the change in her all the same, and not everyone welcomed it. One evening, the priest's apprentice, a young man named Ivar, with eyes like flint and a voice too loud for his years, stopped her on the path by the stream. "You shouldn't walk alone," he said. "Not so far from the settlement." Asa met his gaze without blinking. "I'm not alone." He frowned. "It's not safe. Not with old talk stirring again. Old ways." She said nothing. He stepped closer. "You speak to the trees. You hum songs without words. You give charms." "I give herbs," she replied, "for pain, for sleep. You give superstition." She turned, and her words came calmly, not as a threat, but as a truth too old to be denied. "And yet your mother asked me for help last winter." He reddened. "You should be careful, Asa. The gods are watching." She nodded. "So are the trees," and walked away. That night, she did not sleep. The air felt different, not heavy, but alert, as though the night itself were listening. She sat by the hearth, the pendant cradled in her palm, the cloth peeled back like petals from a long-closed bud. "Have you ever wondered," she whispered, not to anyone, not even herself, "what it means to hold something others fear?" The pendant gave no answer, but she could feel its shape warming slowly against her skin. Elsewhere, in the temple longhouse, the priest and his apprentice whispered behind carved doors. They spoke of balance, of danger, of growing unrest. "She walks the old path," said the apprentice. "People believe she has power." "Then we must remind them what true power is," said the priest. "It began small. A goat missing from its pen, a patch of crops withering for no clear reason, a dog found dead near the river." The villagers stirred uneasily. The priest spoke louder in his sermons. "The old ways bring rot," he said. "They open doors that were closed for good reason." Still, no one named Asa directly, but fewer people came to her door. One morning, she walked to the pine stump and found the bundle gone. In its place, a feather, black, barbed, too long for a local bird. Raven, perhaps, or something else. She took it in her hand and closed her eyes. The forest rustled, as though turning toward her. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She only walked home slowly, every step quiet, as if moving through the space between breaths. She knew then. The time to remain half-hidden was over. That evening, she sat by the fire. Her mother watched her for a long time. "You remind me of her," she said at last. "Even when you were small, the way you watched, the way you walked." "I don't want to be her," Asa said quietly. Her mother nodded. "You won't be. Then, after a pause, you'll be yourself." The next day, Asa stepped out of the house wearing the pendant, not hidden, not wrapped. It rested plainly on her chest, catching the morning light like a sliver of dawn caught in silver. People noticed. Some turned away, but some nodded, ever so slightly, as they passed. She spent that day walking the edges of the village, not saying much, only walking, letting herself be seen. And the wind followed her, curling around her feet like a cat that had not forgotten her scent. At the edge of the forest, near the bones of the burned longhouse, she paused. Nothing remained but stone and memory. She knelt, placed one hand on the blackened earth, and whispered something too soft to carry. Then she rose and left. The next morning, a new flower bloomed at that spot, yellow, low to the ground, shaped like a star. No one claimed to have planted it, and no one dared remove it. The air tonight carries the scent of earth warmed by recent sun, but cooled once more by twilight. Somewhere, deep in the woods, the leaves murmur among themselves, not with wind, but with memory. Even stones remember footsteps, if you walk gently enough. Let your breath slow with the rhythm of a distant stream. Let your thoughts soften like lichen on bark. We walk now into deeper places, where truth has no need to shout, and fear wears many cloaks. In the weeks after Asa wore the pendant, the village shifted like soil under melting snow. Nothing cracked, nothing broke, but things moved, just beneath the surface. The priest spoke often of obedience, not loudly, not with threat, but often. His words were wrapped in calm tones, in warnings veiled as blessings. There is safety in the familiar, he told them. The gods are clear. Chaos grows where old ways return. He never said Asa's name. He did not have to. She knew what he meant, and so did the others. The strange thing was, the more he spoke, the more they remembered her calm hands, her quiet advice. The grandmother still walked. The sleepwalking cousin now laughed. The mother whose newborn had once cried without breath now watched that child grow strong and pink-cheeked. And though they glanced over their shoulders before speaking to Asa, they still came. Some brought wool, others fish or eggs. Some brought nothing at all but grief, and left with lighter hearts. Still, fear lingered, not only among the villagers, but in Asa, too. She wore the pendant each morning. She hid it again each night. A rhythm, a compromise. But she felt it changing her, not in power, not in skill, but in awareness. As though the old woman's knowledge lived not just in the herbs, or the runes, or the bones, but in the way her feet pressed the path, in the space she made simply by being present. One day, a girl with a twisted foot came to her. She said little, only that her mother had told her to go to the temple, but the temple gave her nothing. They said the gods had chosen my limp, and I should bear it with pride. Asa said nothing at first. She knelt instead, studied the girl's foot, asked careful questions. Then she gave her oil to warm over fire, and showed her how to bind her leg tightly at night. She told her to eat more root vegetables, less salt-cured meat. The girl returned a week later, walking straighter. She smiled, shy but bright. My mother said, I should thank the gods, she said, but I wanted to thank you first. Asa did not speak, only placed a hand on the girl's head and nodded. The next day, a group of men stood outside her family's longhouse. They did not shout. They did not enter, but they waited, arms folded, expressions blank. Her mother barred the door. They won't do anything, she said softly, but they want you to know they're watching. Asa said nothing. She only went out the back, down the path, into the woods. There, by the stump, where the sacred tree had once stood, she sat in the moss. The pendant grew warm against her chest, and the trees whispered. She could not make out the words, not yet, but she felt them. That night, she dreamed of fire, not consuming, not angry, but a fire that danced slowly in a wide circle, flames curling like fingers tracing old songs. In the dream, women stood around it. Not many. 3, maybe 4. One of them wore the crescent pendant. Another wore a fox pelt. The third had a child in her arms. And the fourth, if there was a fourth, stood apart, face hidden, voice silent. Asa woke with the sense that something had been asked of her, but she did not yet know what. Summer deepened, berries ripened, smoke curled sweetly from drying racks, and the fishers hauled in fat catches from the fjord. But tension twisted itself into the air like bramble. The priest began speaking of purging. Not with fire, he said, not again, but with truth. We must look inward. Cast out the false. Close the doors we once left open. More people turned away from Asa. Some apologized, some didn't. One day, as she walked the lower path, a stone struck her shoulder, small, hurled by a child, but it left a bruise. She did not flinch, did not chase, but the bruise darkened and stayed for days, a mark not only of pain, but of decision. That evening, she took the herbs Yngvild had left, the last of them, crushed them into a bowl, boiled them over oak coals. She drank and lay down. The dream came again. But this time, the fire burned higher, and the fourth woman stepped forward. Her face was Asa's, but older, and in her eyes, not sorrow, not fear, but stillness, like a stone that has stood through 10 winters and remembers each storm. Asa awoke without startlement, without words, only motion. She gathered roots, boiled linen, carved 2 small charms from elderwood and tied them with black thread. Then she waited. The next night, a man came to her home. He was tall, thin, with sunken eyes and shaking hands. His wife hovered behind him. He's been touched, she whispered, since the last storm. He sees things, stutters, can't sleep. Asa gestured for them to sit. She laid hands on the man's head, then his chest, then his palms. Then she gave him a brew. Strong, bitter, and she placed one of the charms beneath his pillow. He slept that night for the first time in 13 days. The next morning, word spread. Even those who had turned away began to whisper again, not with scorn, but with wonder. She did not embrace it, but she did not hide. The priest, seeing this, called a gathering. He stood beneath the bones of the sacred tree and read from the scrolls brought from the west. We are at a crossroads, he said. Some paths lead backward, some into shadow. The gods demand clarity. He looked at Asa. She did not lower her eyes. You wear a token of the old ways, he said. Do you deny it? She stepped forward. I wear memory, she said, not shadow, not harm. You fear the old ways. But the old ways fed us when your scrolls brought no bread. They healed children when no priest would touch them. They gave comfort to the grieving. She paused. The wind shifted. And they remember what you've chosen to forget. Silence. A crow called in the distance. Then, from the back of the crowd, a voice. It was the Twisted Foot girl. She helped me walk. Another voice. The grandmother. She eased my pain. A third. The mother of the quiet boy. He speaks again. And slowly, the fear shifted. Not gone, but moved. The priest said nothing more that day, and the next morning he was gone. Some said he returned west, others said he had a vision and followed it into the mountains. But Asa knew the truth. He left because the village had chosen. Not her, not the old ways, but memory. And that, in the end, was enough. There is a hush that only lingers when the fire burns low and no one stirs. A stillness thick as wool, as if the night itself is listening, not with ears, but with breath. Let your thoughts drift like embers on dark water. We are deep within the forest now, not the one with trees, but the one woven of memory, silence, and something older than fear. After the priest vanished, the village did not speak of him. Not directly. There were no accusations, no chants, no songs sung in his absence. But the silence around his name became its own sort of hymn, a quiet, cautious reverence for the shift that had taken place. A new kind of order began to settle in. Not one of law or decree, but of memory. Asa did not take a title. She did not ask for offerings. nor did she sit on any council. She did not claim to lead, but slowly, naturally, people began to turn to her, not because they were told to, but because they remembered what it felt like to be heard. She walked the village paths now with steady steps, and fewer turned away from her. Some still did, not out of anger, but out of uncertainty. The old fear had not vanished. It had only quieted, crouching like a sleeping wolf. And Asa, she understood that. She carried the pendant still, not hidden, not flaunted. It rested against her chest like a breath she had learned to live with. Not a weapon, not a shield, but a remembering. One afternoon, a storm swept down from the northern sea, not violent, but slow and heavy. Rain fell in wide, soft sheets. The sky was low and the fjord hissed with mist. In that hush, Asa visited the stream near the edge of the forest where the bramble grew thick. There, she found the wide-eyed girl again, the one who had once scratched her arms in sleep and drawn spirals in silence. The girl sat beneath a birch tree, hands buried in wet moss, face lifted to the rain. "You hear it too," Asa said, kneeling beside her. The girl nodded. Asa didn't ask what. She didn't need to. Instead, she reached into her pouch and pulled out a flat stone, smooth and pale. She handed it to the girl without words. The child turned it in her hand, then placed it to her ear. She listened. Then, very softly, she smiled. A week later, the girl's mother came to Asa. She wept without shame. "I don't know what you've done," she said, "but my daughter sleeps now, peacefully. And when she wakes, she sings." Asa took her hand. "She was always whole," she said. "She only needed space to unfold." That night, the girl left a carved twig at Asa's door, twisted into the shape of a bird with wings spread wide. From then on, they called her Svala, Little Swallow. As summer deepened, Asa's home became a place not only of healing, but of listening. Some came to be mended. Some came with dreams they could not interpret. Some came only to sit in silence. She welcomed them all, but she did not speak much of power. She spoke of patience, of rhythms, of roots that spread even when unseen. She began to walk the forest paths that Yngvild had once walked. She found old markers carved faintly into trees, spirals, eyes, leaves. She pressed her fingers into their moss-soft grooves and whispered names not spoken aloud since the longhouse burned. One afternoon, she found the hollow tree. Inside, a bundle, dried herbs, a carved comb, a fragment of bone etched with the same spiral as her pendant. She wept then, not for sorrow, but for recognition, for knowing she was not the first and would not be the last. When she returned to the village, her hands carried a new steadiness. She began teaching, quietly, not to many, just 2 or 3. Girls who lingered, who watched the way she crushed seeds or read the patterns in smoke. She didn't call them apprentices. She called them listeners, and they listened well. One of them was Svala. Another was the twisted foot girl, now walking without pain. The third was the boy who once hummed instead of speaking, now older, his voice soft but sure. Each one came for different reasons, but they stayed because they understood something the others didn't yet have words for. That knowledge was not just for curing or protecting. It was for remembering. And remembering, as Asa knew well, was dangerous to those who built power on forgetting. It was near midsummer when the warning came. Not a message, not a threat. A dead fox at the village boundary, its body untouched by wound, its eyes glazed but open. The villagers found it at dawn. Some said nothing. Others murmured omens. But Asa, when she heard, stood very still. She walked out to the fox, knelt beside it, laid a hand on its fur, and whispered, "I know." That evening, she burned herbs in her hearth, not for illness, but for clarity. She brewed a drink and gave none of it away, only drank it herself. Then she sat at the fire and waited, and the dreams came again. But this time, she was not the fourth woman. She was the fire. The others stood around her, and one by one, they stepped into the flame, not to burn, but to be remembered. She awoke with smoke in her hair and the knowledge that time was shifting again. A new threat was coming, not from within, but from outside. 2 days later, scouts returned. A band of men, not raiders, but strangers, had been seen traveling south along the fjord. Their clothing was not like the villagers. Their speech carried harsh consonants, and they asked questions. Do you have a healer here? Do the women still follow the old ways? No one answered them, but the strangers waited, camped at the river's bend, watching. Asa said nothing at first, but she began preparing. She packed herbs, carved charms, gave each of her listeners a pouch of seeds, and taught them how to scatter them under snow to mark safe ground. Then she gathered the council. I don't ask for your defense, she said, only your silence. The elders nodded, not out of agreement, but out of memory. They remembered Yngvild and what followed when they did not listen. That night, Asa and her listeners walked out beyond the village edge. They stood by the river and waited. The strangers did not approach, but they watched, for hours, until the moon was high and mist rose from the water like breath. Then, from the trees behind them, a chorus of owls called. 1, then 2, then 3. The strangers left before dawn, and no one followed. In the days after, Asa said little. She resumed her quiet rhythm. Her listeners returned to gathering herbs. The villagers slowly breathed again. But the air was different, not darker, but older, like a door had been opened, and no one was quite sure what waited behind it. Asa sat by the fire one night, carving a new pendant. This one shaped not like a crescent, but a full circle, split down the center with a line of fire etched in ash. Svala watched her, eyes wide. What is it for? She asked. Asa looked up. For the one who comes next, she said. Who will that be? Asa smiled. I don't know yet, and the fire crackled softly in reply. The night has grown thick with mist, and the world seems to sway as if dreaming. A fox moves across the edge of a clearing, its paws silent on wet earth. In the hush between its passing and the rustling of the trees, the land breathes. Let yourself lean into that breath now, gentle, slow, like moss growing in the cracks of old stone. The story continues, not with thunder, but with quiet footsteps and the weight of things remembered. The circle pendant Asa carved sat on her work table for many days, unfinished. Each morning, she ran her fingers over the line she'd burned into the center, that thin seam of ash dividing the full circle, a reminder that no wholeness was ever truly without its break. It wasn't meant to be worn by her. She knew that. But the time to pass it on had not yet come. Instead, she carried it with her when she walked the hills, not for protection, but to remember her place in the wider rhythm of things. Spring had passed into summer's peak. The birds nested high in the pines now, and the meadows had bloomed with yellow and purple flowers that spread like stars fallen to earth. She visited the hollow tree again. This time there was no bundle waiting, only the memory of her own hands pressing into bark. But she left something, a piece of woven cloth dyed with crushed berries, folded neatly, no note. That afternoon, a woman Asa had never spoken to approached her by the drying racks. Her face was lined, her hair streaked with iron gray, and her voice cracked from too many winters. My husband won't speak, she said simply. Since his brother drowned in the river last frost, he rises, eats, mends nets, but his mouth remains closed. Asa looked into the woman's eyes. You've carried that silence with him, she said. The woman nodded. It's heavy. I cannot make him speak, Asa said softly, but I can give you something that may help carry the weight. She prepared a pouch of herbs to place beneath his bed. She told the woman to sit with him by firelight and speak, even if he did not answer, just to speak, of storms, of bread, of the way the river sounded that night. Words do not need answers, Asa said. They need room to land. A week later, The woman returned, with tears in her eyes. He whispered my name, she said. Asa didn't smile, but she placed her hand gently on the woman's wrist and gave a single nod. She knew the river was slowly giving him back, but not everyone saw these moments. Some only saw the gatherings in the woods, the bundles of herbs hanging from beams, the small carved tokens tucked beneath door frames. The new priest, a man younger than the last, but with sharper teeth, arrived in early harvest season. He was not from the coast. His accent was different, his hands soft. He spoke with confidence. He smiled too often, and he watched Asa with a pleasant stillness that felt colder than snow. I've heard much, he told her one day, in the middle of the market path, of healing, of old ways, of circles drawn in ash. Asa met his gaze without fear. Then you've heard stories, she said, and stories, like roots, are best understood slowly. He leaned closer. Some roots rot. She tilted her head. And some hold the whole hill together. He said nothing more that day. But he visited homes, shared bread, blessed livestock, whispered doubts, and slowly the questions returned. Not loud, not public, but whispered. She walks alone too often. She burns things the rest of us bury. She teaches children to listen to trees. Asa heard it. Of course she did. She had lived long enough in silence to know when it starts wrapping around others. She spoke to her listeners quietly. When the wind shifts, she said, lean into it. Do not brace against it. Let it pass through you. They asked if she feared the priest. No, she said, but I respect the storm that follows a man who fears what he cannot name. One night, a dog was found dead near her home. No wounds, just lying in the grass, tongue blue, body cold. Asa buried it herself, without words, without crowd. And the next morning, she brewed a strong tea, bitter, smoky, and poured it down the path behind her longhouse. Not a spell, not a threat, a cleansing. But the fear had already grown legs. One family pulled their daughter from Asa's group of listeners. Another stopped leaving offerings. A third wouldn't meet her eyes. And still, they came at night. When a child coughed too hard, when a wound would not close, when sleep would not come. Always in whispers. Always with thanks they dared not say aloud. One evening, as the sun slid low behind the hills and turned the river gold, Asa stood by the old burnt stone foundation, where Yngvild's longhouse had once stood. The flowers planted there had multiplied. Not wild, not weedy, but full, bright. She sat among them and held the circle pendant in her hand. She had not given it away, not yet. But the time was near. That night, she dreamed of Svala, not the child she had known, but older, standing barefoot in the river, eyes full of the sky, hands cupped around a flame that did not burn. In the dream, Svala turned to her and said, "When it comes, I won't run." Asa woke with the weight of the dream pressing gently on her chest, like a cloak draped by hands she could no longer name. 3 days later, a new gathering was called by the priest. Not a trial, he said, not a condemnation, a reckoning. The people gathered near the stones. He stood tall, robe immaculate, eyes gleaming with certainty. There are those, he said, who walk beside us but do not walk with us, who speak in riddles and stir unrest, who call to powers that belong only to the gods. Asa stood apart. She did not hide. Her listeners stood near, watching, hands folded. The priest gestured toward her. "We ask," he said, "that she return what was never hers, that she step away from teachings that sow confusion, that she unbind what should never have been opened." Asa stepped forward, not quickly, not with defiance, but with the calm of water that has always known how to find its own level. "I have bound nothing," she said, "only remembered, only listened." A murmur. She raised the pendant. "This was not taken. It was passed, and I will not bury what was given with trust." The priest's voice rose, not in anger, but in firm, performative grace. "Then you choose to stand against the gods." "No," Asa said. "I choose to stand with the earth, with the mothers who bled and still sang, with the children who saw visions and were not believed, with the wind that speaks names older than yours." Silence. Then, from behind, a figure stepped forward. Svala. She walked through the crowd, her steps sure, no fear. She stood beside Asa. Then another came, the twisted foot girl. Then the boy, who once hummed instead of speaking. And one by one, slowly, without shouting, others came too. Not all, but enough. They stood, and that was all they needed to do. The priest turned pale. He stepped back. He did not speak again that day, and when the morning came, he was gone. Not vanished, but left. Returned to the road from which he'd come. And Asa stood in the light of the new day, the circle pendant warm in her palm. She turned to Svala, held it out, and smiled. The dew is thick tonight, clinging to every blade of grass like pearls strung by the hands of the unseen. The sky is clear now, star-flecked, and the moon sits just above the ridge, a quiet watcher of the earth's old rhythms. You do not need to rush. The fire burns low, and the story still walks gently. Let your breath match the hush of the wind against the hillside. We are not yet at the end, but deeper now than we've ever been. When Asa placed the pendant into Svala's hands, no proclamation was spoken. No fire blazed. The earth did not shake, nor did the sky crack with light. Instead, the girl took it the way one might take a stone offered by a stream, as if it had always been meant for her hand. She didn't speak, but her fingers closed around the carved circle like she knew what it was before she saw it. Asa stepped back. Not away, just back. That was how the passing began, not with ceremony, but with stillness. That night, the wind shifted again, not sharp, but new, carrying scents of sweetgrass and pine and the faintest trace of rain that hadn't yet come. The village slept, but the hills watched. Svala wore the pendant openly the next day. She did not boast, she did not gather, but people noticed. Some smiled, some frowned. One woman crossed herself and walked the other way, but none said her name aloud. Not yet. Asa, meanwhile, turned her steps more often toward the forest. She began walking longer paths, visiting old stones, replacing charms that had weathered in the rain, speaking softly to trees that had once stood near sacred sites now forgotten. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to know your work is nearly done, not in defeat, but in fulfillment? To have planted what needed planting, and now to watch it root, without needing to stay to see it flower? Asa had begun to feel that truth settling behind her ribs. She still tended the sick, still whispered advice, still sat with grieving wives or restless boys. But more often now, she sent others. Svala, the boy, now nearly a man, the once limping girl whose hands had become deft with linen and flame. They were not finished, but they were beginning. One afternoon, as the sun lay thick over the fields and bees hummed lazily over blooming clover, Asa knelt near the edge of the stream. She dipped a cloth in the water, wrung it, and laid it across her brow. She had not slept much the night before. Dreams had come again. But this time, they did not come as warnings or visions. They came as a conversation. Yngvild was there, not old, not young, but calm. She stood in the longhouse, whole again, hearth warm behind her, and she had said, very simply, "It's almost time." Asa had nodded in the dream. She hadn't asked for what. She already knew. Later that evening, as twilight bled into the horizon like ink on wet linen, she returned to the stump where the sacred tree had once stood. She laid her palm on the cracked wood, closed her eyes, and spoke the name she hadn't spoken in years. Not Yngvild, her own mother. There had never been time before, or space. But now the name came easy, and with it, tears. She stayed until the stars came out, and when she walked back to the village, she felt lighter, not empty, just done. The village, too, had changed. People no longer asked for council meetings. Disagreements were settled over bread or shared cider. The well was kept cleaner. Children were heard more often laughing, not just running. It wasn't perfect. No place ever is. But the fear had loosened. The old shadows had shifted shape, and in their place, questions, curiosity, even care. The strangers came again once, a small group, merchants this time, with dark cloaks and salt-stiffened hands. They carried news from the east, from the cities where kings sat and priests grew bolder. "They'll come west soon," one of them muttered, their words sharper than their swords. But when they saw the pendant on Svala's chest, they said nothing more. They left quickly. That night, Asa sat with her listeners around the fire, not to instruct, but to remember. She told them of things that had not been said before, of the first time she'd crushed bloodroot under her nails, of the night she buried a small bird in silence and woke to find herbs sprouting where it had lain. She told them of her own doubt, her long fear, and the moment she first knew she would not always be alone. No one interrupted. Even the fire listened. When she finished, Svala reached out, not with a question, but with her hand. Asa took it. They sat like that for a long time, and when the embers cooled, she rose. "I won't leave," she said, "but I won't remain either." And they understood, because now they didn't need her to stay. They only needed to remember. In the days that followed, Asa walked less often through the village. She spent more time in the hills, near the hidden well, or seated beneath the wide-boughed pine near the eastern ridge. Sometimes she left bundles behind. Sometimes she simply sat. And sometimes, when the wind was right, she whispered songs, not in any tongue still spoken, but known by heart to the earth beneath her. One morning, a child found a small wooden token on the path to the stream. A circle split down the middle, carved into birch and tied with faded thread. She gave it to her grandmother, who gave it to the healer, who brought it to Svala. Svala only smiled. "She's preparing," she said. "For what?" No one asked. One dusk, Asa returned to the sacred stump one last time. She knelt, placed a small bowl of crushed lavender, juniper ash, and meadowsweet in the center of the hollow. Then, very softly, she sang. Not a lullaby, not a hymn, a breath song, the kind sung by women tending coals long after others had slept. When she rose, the bowl remained, but her presence there felt finished. She returned to her longhouse that evening, ate slowly, lit a single oil lamp. Then she sat on the bench near the door, eyes half closed, the firelight dancing in her silver-streaked hair. And she whispered, "I've done enough." In the morning, she was gone. Not vanished, not taken, simply not there. The bed was undisturbed, the hearth still warm. The pendant she once wore, the crescent one, rested on her pillow. The door was unlatched, and a trail of dry leaves curled inward, as if something had stepped through them without weight. They searched, of course, out of love, not suspicion. They found no signs, but under the pine at the eastern ridge, the grass was pressed down in a shape not unlike sleep. And beside it, a stone, smooth, round, marked only with a spiral. Svala placed both pendants, the crescent and the circle, into a bundle wrapped in wool. She didn't wear them, not yet, but she knew one day they would pass again. For now, her steps were steady. The villagers still came, still whispered, but the whispers no longer feared. They remembered, and in the remembering, they healed. The morning rises not in sound, but in scent, of wet stone, of dew, touched nettles, of distant firewood just catching flame. Light spills into the valley like a memory, soft-edged and slow-moving. There is no rush here, no sharp line between night and day, only unfolding, only return. Let your thoughts drift as the clouds do, barely tethered, gently stretched. The story continues, now with new hands and old echoes. Svala did not speak of Asa's departure to many. The village asked in small voices, and she answered with calm eyes. She went where she needed to, and that, for most, was enough. But the listeners, the others Asa had taught, they gathered in the longhouse one evening, the smell of dried herbs still lingering on the beams, Asa's fire pit still lined with stones she had placed one by one in her first days of tending. They did not weep. Instead, they each placed something in the hearth, not as offerings, but as remembrances. A twist of bark, a worn comb, a strip of dyed wool, a smooth pebble from the river. None of these things held power on their own, but together they carried weight. And when the flames were lit, they burned clean, with no smoke. It was Svala who spoke first. She didn't say goodbye. She never said goodbye, the boy replied. Only go on. Do we? The once limping girl asked. Go on? Svala looked down at her hands. One of them still held the circle pendant, the other the crescent. She didn't wear them. She placed them both on the table. We don't go on because we are told to, she said. We go on because the work is not finished. And so they did. Not by becoming Asa, but by becoming themselves. Svala began walking the forest paths as Asa once had, not to seek, but to tend. She left tokens at old shrines, repaired charms strung between trees, whispered songs only the stones remembered. The boy, his name was Leif, turned to the river. He began recording dreams, not in ink, but in symbols drawn in ash or carved into bark. When villagers brought him dreams they could not understand, he read the ash like language. And the girl, Alva, became the firekeeper. She gathered herbs by moonlight and began weaving cord with plant fibers so fine they shimmered in sunlight. It was her hands that wrapped the new bundles they began to share with the village, for easing breath, for clearing sorrow, for sleep. In time, they were not seen as Asa's students. They were known by their own names. But always, behind the names, there was that quiet recognition. They were of the line, the thread, the memory that never burned away. One day, a woman from a village across the fjord came walking with a limp and a basket of smoked fish. She had heard stories. Her child had stopped eating, barely sleeping, and would not speak. She had gone to temples, to seers. None had helped. Someone whispered the name Svala, and she had come. Svala met her without fanfare. She asked no grand questions. She did not recite chants. She simply listened. Then she asked to see the child. He sat near the hearth, hollow-eyed but calm. Svala gave him a feather and a bowl of water. And she waited. After an hour, he placed the feather into the bowl, then looked at her. What now? He asked. You tell it where to go, she said. He did, and that night he slept. The mother wept with gratitude, offered fish, offered coin. Svala took neither. Let him keep the bowl, she said. There are more stories waiting inside it. More came, over time, from neighboring settlements, from traders passing through, from old women who remembered their mothers speaking of spirals and quiet flames. They came not because of fame, but because of a hunger they couldn't name, a hunger for something that had almost been lost. And all the while, Asa's name was barely spoken, but her work remained. Sometimes, in the mornings, Svala walked to the pine ridge where Asa had once slept. The pressed grass had long risen, but the spiral stone still remained. Moss now curled at its edges, and small blue flowers had bloomed nearby. One day, Svala brought a child with her, not her own, but a boy who had followed her around for weeks, asking about birds and dreams and the sound of wind in chimneys. They sat by the stone together. The boy traced the spiral with one finger. Was she a queen? He asked. No, Svala said. A warrior? No. Then what? Svala smiled. She remembered. The boy thought for a long time. Will I remember too? She didn't answer. Instead, she handed him a string of beads, uneven, carved by hand, tied with a knot she had learned long ago. Keep this, she said. Not to wear, just to carry. Why? Because some things are not meant to be explained, only remembered. He nodded, as if he understood, and maybe he did. The seasons turned again. Summer into harvest, harvest into frost. The fjord froze at the edges. Smoke curled tighter above every roof. And still, the quiet work continued. No priest came. No raids broke the hills. Just life. And the slow, steady growth of something once feared, but now trusted. One night, Svala dreamed again of the fire circle. But this time, she was not outside it. She stood in its center. Alva stood to her left, Leaf to her right. Behind her, a shape. Tall, still. Not quite Asa, but not quite not. And the voice, neither spoken nor heard, whispered something she carried long after she woke. The fire remembers your name. The next day, Svala carved 2 new pendants, not in crescent, not in circle, but in wave. She gave one to Alva, one to Leaf. She kept none for herself. That night, as frost traced the windows and the wind danced along the eaves, the village slept soundly. And outside, beneath the pine ridge, the spiral stone glistened with hoarfrost, and the flowers beside it did not wilt, even in the cold. There's a stillness in the hour before dawn, not quite night, not quite day, when everything waits. Even the wind holds its breath. It is in this in-between where the old stories linger, when time feels slow enough to listen, not just to voices, but to the spaces between them. Let your thoughts settle like frost on an untouched field. The village is quiet, but the memory still walks. Winter came softly that year. No great storms, no freezing rains, just a steady hush. Snow falling like dust, the fjord glazing over a little more each morning. The roofs were thick with white, the hearths burned longer, and the people moved slower, wrapped in furs and silence. Svala kept to her rhythm. She rose before the light, walked the boundary paths, tended her herbs with careful breath. In the afternoons, she sat with Alva and Leaf near the fire, preparing the bundles for those who would knock after dark. Not all came openly, but more than before. People brought stories now, not just ailments, and they listened, not just for cures, but for remembrance. One man came with dreams of his dead wife. She sings to me, he said, eyes rimmed with sleep, but I cannot make out the words. Svala gave him a small pouch of thyme and a string of river beads. Place this beneath your pillow, she said, and when she sings again, hum the sound back to her. He did, and the next day he returned, weeping. She laughed, he whispered. She laughed in the dream. It wasn't about healing anymore. Not only. It was about mending what could not be seen. And still, Svala did not wear a pendant. Not the wave she had carved, nor the circle Asa left her. She carried memory in her body now, in the way her hands moved, in the quiet she offered, in the steadiness of her step. One morning, a stranger arrived. Not a priest, not a raider, a woman, alone, wrapped in seal hide and bearing a satchel worn thin at the corners. She said her name was Brynja. She had come from the islands to the north, where the wind never stops and the sea speaks louder than men. I followed the spiral, she said, the stories that drift across the water. Svala welcomed her, not with questions, but with warmth. They sat beside the hearth that night, the snow muffling the world outside. Brynja spoke slowly. There were women like you, she said, long ago, before the fires. They lived in stone huts near the cliffs, tended wounds, sang to whales, spoke to roots before pulling them. Svala nodded. There were women like you too, listening across the water. They didn't need to say more. Something old had returned. Brynja stayed through the winter. She never asked to join the listeners, but she walked with them, shared her plants, taught new ways to steep old herbs. Her hands knew knots Svala had never seen, knots that sealed warmth into cloaks and kept pouches from spilling in the wind. She slept in the old loft of the longhouse, and when she walked through the village, the people nodded, not as to a stranger, but to a thread they hadn't realized was missing. As the days passed, Alva asked once, "Will she stay?" Svala replied, "She already has." They didn't know then what the spring would bring, but the forest did. The crows flew lower than usual that March. The foxes did not call out. The trees, usually quick to bud near the thaw, held their silence. One day, Svala stood at the ridge, the spiral stone beneath her hand, and she whispered, "What are we being warned for?" The wind offered no answer, but that night, a fire was spotted on the far side of the fjord. Not a hearth, a hall, a burning hall. The next day, a boat washed ashore, its hull cracked, its oars missing. Inside, 2 men and a girl. The girl was half conscious, mumbling in a tongue none of them knew. The men had fever in their eyes and bruises on their necks. They had come from the east, not by choice. Their village had fallen, not to men, they said, but to fear. A priest came, one murmured, not with fire, with knives for tongues. He told the children their mothers were witches. He shivered, though wrapped in wool. They believed him. The girl stirred, her voice cracked. "They burned our teacher." Svala looked at Alva, then Leif, then Brynja. No words passed. They knew it had begun again. The slow rise of forgetting, of fear dressed as faith. But the village here was different now. They gave the strangers food, shelter, and silence. They did not ask questions the first week. They simply let them rest. On the 8th night, the girl, no older than 10, stood beside the fire and whispered, "She told me to find the spiral. She said it would know what to do." Svala took her hands. "Then you've done the hard part," she said. "Now we remember." The girl did not cry, she only nodded. Asa had once said, "Some burdens are lighter when shared." And now the burden was shared. The listeners began teaching again, not with lessons, but with rhythm. How to steep water for dreams, how to grind bark for breath, how to sit in silence beside grief without needing to fill it. Spring came late that year, but it came, and when the first flowers opened near the ridge, they bloomed not in yellow, not in purple, but in deep red. Like the cloak Asa once wore, like fire turned to root. Svala stood near them one morning, the child beside her. "What are they called?" the girl asked. Svala thought. "They don't have a name yet," she said. "Would you like to give them one?" The girl crouched low, studied the petals, then whispered, "Ashleaf." And the wind, passing gently through the trees, carried the name away. It would come back. All true names do. The rain tonight is soft as breath, tapping gently on the thatched rooftops, threading through pine branches, pooling in hollow stones long carved by time. No storm, no wind, just the steady rhythm of water, a lullaby from the sky to the soil. Let it wash over you. Let it hush the world. In this quiet, the story continues. Not louder, just deeper. The ash leaves bloomed in clusters, low to the ground, wide-petaled, with a color not easily named, somewhere between blood and rust, like something alive and ancient. No one remembered planting them. And yet they grew, thick near the spiral stone and down along the path to the stream, curling between roots, blooming even in shade. The child who had named them, her name was Erna, returned to the patch each morning, touching their leaves with small, careful fingers, whispering things that only plants and the wind might understand. Svala never interrupted her. Some things were learned best in silence. As the thaw spread across the hills and the fjord broke free of ice, the village woke again. Boats were mended, nets patched, chickens released into muddy courtyards. There was laughter, real, full laughter, as the men drank too much and the children ran too fast. But something else moved beneath the surface. The world beyond the valley had grown restless. Traders came with rumors tucked in their cloaks, of more Eastern priests, of burned scrolls, of the outlawing of charms once worn freely around necks. They said midwives had been forbidden from using roots during labor, that burial rites were being replaced with rituals from across the sea. Some in the village grew nervous again. Old fears stirred like coals under ash, but Svala met it with calm. She did not deny what came. She acknowledged it, like weather, and she prepared. She taught Alva how to distill oil from pine needles, showed Leaf how to read wounds by scent alone, guided Erna in weaving ash leaf petals into cord that never frayed, even in rain. And she spoke again, at last, of Asa, of the longhouse that once stood by the shore, of the fire that did not consume her, of the name that was no longer feared, but remembered. She didn't fight, Svala said once, to Erna. She stood. That was enough. Erna had nodded, and that night she placed one of her woven cords on the spiral stone. She didn't say why, but in the morning the cord was gone. The flowers had spread a little farther. A few weeks later, a group of travelers appeared, 6 of them, cloaked in gray, quiet-spoken. They did not ask for food. They brought their own, but they asked questions. They asked about the herbs in the drying racks. They asked who had planted the ash leaves. They asked if there were still women here who remembered the old ways. Svala did not lie, but neither did she explain. We remember what must not be forgotten, she said simply. The eldest among the travelers studied her a long time, then said, There are villages not far from here, where remembering carries a price. Svala met his gaze. So does forgetting. He did not press further. They left at dawn, and though no threat had passed between them, the frost returned the following morning, despite the season. It clung to the garden beds, curled the tips of leaves. The earth had heard. Alva found a bird that day, not dead, but stunned. A nightjar, mottled gray-brown, its wing twisted, its eyes wide and glassy. She carried it to the hearth, wrapped it gently. Svala placed 3 drops of pine oil on its feathers and whispered a breath song, not a healing, a remembering. By dusk, the bird blinked, stretched, and flew. It circled the longhouse, once before vanishing into the trees. The people took it as a sign, but no one said of what. The old woman who lived at the edge of the village came that night. Her name was Thyra, and her hair was white as sheep's wool, bound always in a braid thick as rope. She had never come before, never spoken to the listeners, never walked the paths Svala tended. But now she came, and sat, and wept, not with sorrow, but with release. My mother taught me songs, she said, but I buried them. She reached into her satchel and withdrew a bundle of cloth. Inside, a comb carved with spirals, worn smooth by decades of hiding. I thought it would curse me, she whispered, but now I think it cursed me more to forget. Svala took the comb in both hands and bowed her head. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. That same week, Leaf walked beyond the southern ridge, past where the trees grew close and the light dimmed by early afternoon. He had seen something in his dreams, a cave mouth shaped like an open mouth, lined with moss like teeth. And when he found it, it was exactly as he had seen. Inside, dry leaves, charred stones, a half-buried carving of a figure with no face and hands open. He didn't touch it. He knelt, laid his palm on the ground, and whispered a name he didn't know he knew. When he returned, he brought with him a stone no larger than a fist, veined with white like ice through earth. He placed it on the longhouse mantel. Who will it be for? Alva asked. Leaf said, We'll know when they arrive. That night, Svala sat alone beneath the stars. She did not dream. She did not hum. She only listened. And in that stillness, the sound came. Not a voice, not music, just the slow, steady rhythm of things growing. Unseen, but unyielding. She smiled, and in the dark, beneath her breath, she whispered, "They still fear us." She placed her hand on the earth, and that means we're not finished yet. Tonight, the wind moves through the pines like an old lullaby hummed by no one and everyone. The stars above do not glimmer so much as pulse, slow, patient, steady as breath. Nothing rushes here. The fire is low, but warm, and the walls do not creak with fear. The story waits, uncoiling like smoke above a quiet hearth. Drift closer now. Let your bones loosen. We return once more. The days grew long again. Spring tilted slowly toward summer, and the village moved with it. Children chased geese through wet grass. Cloth was hung to dry in long, rippling lines. Trout stirred in the stream beds, and bees, fat and golden, drifted between the ash leaf flowers, which now bloomed even near the temple stones, untouched. No one removed them. Even those who still crossed themselves did not bend to uproot what had come back without being planted. Svala's work had become less a role and more a rhythm. Some days were full, a difficult birth, a wound that needed cleansing, a grieving man who simply needed her to sit beside him until his breath evened out. Other days passed in silence, with long hours spent grinding bark or sorting bundles by the fading light. She did not speak often of Asa now. She did not need to. Asa was everywhere, in the way the listeners walked the boundaries, in the way old women now hummed songs they once denied knowing, in the soft pause before someone asked Svala a question, that hesitation born not of fear, but of reverence. One morning, Erna came running. She was older now, more girl than child, her legs longer, her voice stronger, but her eyes were still wide with that other-seeing way of hers. "I heard something," she said. "Not in my ears, in the roots." Svala knelt beside her. "What kind of sound?" "Like shifting, like something old waking up." Svala nodded. "You're not wrong." That evening, Brynja returned from her walk in the northern forest with a furrow in her brow. She'd gone to check the boundary charms, to speak with the trees there, the oldest ones, whose bark bore scars like stories. "They're shedding early," she said, "and they showed me something." Svala motioned for her to continue. Brynja unwrapped a bundle from her pack. Inside, a piece of stone, half buried in moss, now clean. It had markings carved into it. Not spirals this time, but lines in sets of 4, with a 5th cutting through them like a blade. Runes, but not for speech. Marks for tallying, counting, measuring something. They were marking time, Leaf said quietly, peering at the stone. Waiting. For what? Alva asked. No one answered. But they all felt it. Not dread, not threat. Just the turning of something unseen. In the days that followed, the earth seemed to hum underfoot. Birds moved differently. Rain came without clouds, and the sun flickered behind thin veils of wind-blown mist. People in the village grew restless. Not afraid, but alert. Then, one evening, a horn sounded. Not from the village, from the fjord. Boats. 3 of them. Not raiders. Their sails were plain, not blood-red or crested with the wings of the old clans. But their oars cut the water in perfect rhythm, and their helms gleamed. They anchored just beyond the rocks, and waited. By morning, messengers came ashore. Young, clean-shaven, rigid in posture. Dressed not in furs, but in tightly bound cloaks, fastened with a silver cross. "We've come to offer unity," one of them said. "Peace." They bowed slightly to the village elders, but their eyes scanned the houses, the people, and when they landed on Svala, they paused. "We've heard of the woman who heals." "I'm not the only one," Svala said, "but you are the one who teaches." Silence. One of the messengers stepped forward, voice calm, eyes cold. "We've been sent from the east, by those who wish only to bring structure, to gather the scattered." "To replace them?" Svala asked. To elevate them, the man said. With what? With light, with order, Alva exhaled, barely a whisper. They want to convert us. Svala nodded. No need to say it plain, she said. We know the dance. The messengers smiled. We will stay 3 nights, then return with word. And so they did. They pitched no tents. They asked for no food. They simply observed, took notes, and whispered among themselves. The village held its breath. Old men grew quiet. Women closed windows. Children watched, with the wary silence of animals sensing a shift in weather. But Svala did not hide. She walked her paths, tended her fire, spoke when spoken to. And on the 3rd night, she lit a second flame near the spiral stone. Not as a warning, as a remembering. The next morning the messengers returned. They stood before the village, and one of them read from a scroll. The practice of unauthorized healing is to be reported. Gatherings for purpose other than sanctioned worship are forbidden. The use of unapproved symbols is discouraged. Those found in defiance will be summoned before the regional tribunal. Then they looked at Svala and waited. She stepped forward, not with anger, not with fear, just with truth. You speak of light, she said, but light without warmth is not fire. It is punishment. You speak of unity, she continued, but unity without memory is not peace. It is silence. You speak of order, she said, her voice steady, but what order is it that fears old songs, old women, old names? She reached into her cloak and held up both pendants, the circle and the wave. I do not curse. I do not conquer. I do not demand. She lowered the pendants. I remember. The crowd was silent. Even the wind seemed to hush. Then from behind her, Erna stepped forward, a child still, but tall in her quietness. She held a string in her hands, woven ash leaf petals, dried and bound. She tied it around her wrist and said nothing. Alva followed, then Leif, then Brynja, then slowly others. No torches, no cries, just tokens, small and steady. 100 remembered truths worn without apology. The messengers said nothing. They turned, boarded their boats, and left. The silence afterward was not relief. It was reverence. Later that night, the fire burned higher than usual. The listeners sat together and the village watched. No speeches, no declarations, only a simple offering. Svala stood, and for the first time in many seasons, she sang. Not a chant, not a prayer, a cradle song, the kind Asa might have whispered before sleep, the kind Yngvild once hummed behind closed doors, the kind mothers had stopped singing aloud. Now it floated free, and in every corner of the village, eyes closed, not in sleep, but in return. The moon tonight is full, not bright, but soft, like a polished stone worn smooth by water. Its light slips over rooftops, curls around corners, and touches the ground without waking it. Beneath its gaze, nothing is hurried. Even memory walks slower. Rest your thoughts like folded cloth at the edge of a bed. We return now, not to what has changed, but to what refuses to be forgotten. After the boats left, the village did not speak of the messengers for many days. No one needed to. Their absence rang louder than their presence ever had. Instead, the people turned inward, not in fear, but in thought. They repaired nets with quieter hands. They watched the sky with longer stares. And in the corners of longhouses, old songs re-emerged, not sung, just hummed under breath. Svala did not gather the people. She did not hold council or make declarations. She swept her floors. She rinsed herbs in the river. She stitched a torn cloak for a boy whose mother had grown too tired to mend. And in the evenings, she sat by the spiral stone, not to watch, but to listen. One night, Leif came to her with a question he had carried for years. Why were they afraid of Asa? Svala looked up. The moonlight caught her hair, and for a moment, she looked like someone older, someone not fully of the present. They feared what she carried, she said, not because it harmed them, but because it reminded them they had chosen to forget. He nodded slowly, then asked, "And you?" She smiled. "They fear me less, because I do not wait for them to understand." He didn't fully grasp her meaning, not then, but she knew he would, in time. A few days later, Alva found a carving in the woods, half buried beneath a fallen spruce. A flat piece of driftwood, stained dark with age. On it, the figure of a woman standing between two animals, a wolf on one side, a bear on the other. The woman held nothing in her hands. Her palms were open. Alva brought it to Svala. She turned it over slowly, feeling the weight of it, not in her hands, but in her chest. "She doesn't command them," Alva said. Svala nodded. "She stands beside them." They placed it at the base of the sacred stump, not to honor it, but to join it to the root of things. That night, Erna sat beside the hearth and asked, "Is there always a she?" Svala stirred the pot of nettle broth slowly. "There is always someone who listens. That someone is often a woman." Erna squinted at the fire. "Why?" "Because women are taught to carry what isn't theirs. And sometimes, the listening grows stronger than the silence." Erna thought about that for a while. Then she reached for a bit of thread and began braiding it around a small ash leaf. It was how remembering began now, not in runes or scrolls, but in quiet hands. As the summer came, more visitors arrived. Not priests, not messengers, people, tired ones, lost ones, families who had fled villages swallowed by rules too heavy to live under, midwives who had hidden their herb pouches, girls who had never learned their mother's songs. They did not seek shelter, only welcome, and they found it. Svala's longhouse became a place not of answers, but of stillness. The kind of stillness that lets grief sit down without being questioned. The kind that allows joy to arrive without fanfare. One woman arrived alone, barefoot, hair matted with travel. She had carried a carved spoon the entire way, the last thing her grandmother had given her. On it, 3 circles interlocked. When Svala saw it, she touched her own chest, where the pendant used to rest. The woman did not stay. She continued west, but before she left, she sat beneath the spiral stone for a full hour. And when she rose, a single ash leaf had sprouted between 2 roots. That autumn, the harvest was smaller, but no one went hungry. Those with more shared before being asked. The fishers left bundles at the door of the old woman who could no longer gut or salt. The children gathered berries and brought them in handfuls to the listeners, for drying, for dye, for sweetening tea meant to soothe night sweats and broken dreams. The village was not wealthier, but it was rooted. And from time to time, people from far places still came to learn, not from Svala alone, but from Alva, from Leif, from Brynja. Even Erna, now tall enough to braid her own hair, had begun teaching simple things: how to listen to water, how to tie dreams into flax before sleep. One night, the fire crackled louder than usual. A storm was passing somewhere far off, not close enough to bring rain, but close enough that the wind tasted like iron. Svala turned to her listeners. "Do you know why they feared Yngvild?" They looked to her, waiting. Because she never denied what she was. She paused. She didn't ask permission. She didn't beg forgiveness. She remembered too well. Leif asked, "Will they come again?" Svala nodded. "Not the same ones, but they will come." Alva looked down. "What do we do then?" Svala smiled. "We stand." A week later, Svala walked the boundary path alone. She moved slower now, not from pain, but from fullness, like a branch grown heavy with fruit. Every step was deliberate. Every glance lingered a second longer. When she reached the pine ridge, she paused. The spiral stone still stood, but beside it now, another, not placed, grown. A second stone, smaller, rounder, smoother, veined with a faint shimmer like mica or frost. Svala knelt, ran her palm along its side, and said nothing. Somewhere behind her, footsteps approached. Erna, she knelt too. Together, they sat as the light faded and the sky bruised with evening. When the stars came, Erna asked, "What happens if I forget?" Svala leaned her head back against the pine. "You won't." "But what if I do?" Svala's voice was a whisper now. "Then someone else will remember. That's the way of it. Memory moves like water, carried from vessel to vessel." They sat a while longer. Then Svala stood. "I won't walk this path much longer," she said. "It will be yours." Erna didn't cry, but her hands trembled, and Svala placed hers gently over them. "You don't have to be her, or me, or anyone who came before." "Then what should I be?" "Exactly who you already are." They stood together, facing the spiral stones. The wind stirred the grass, and a new name, one not spoken aloud, but felt, passed between them. There's a moment before sunrise when the world forgets its own name, when birds hesitate in their nests, when the mist folds over the fields like a second skin, and time no longer moves forward or back. Let yourself linger in that space now. You are safe here, where old breath becomes new, and the fire of memory glows just beneath the ash. The story has not ended. It is only deepening. Svala had not left the village, but she had stepped back. Her hands no longer opened every door. Her voice no longer gave every answer. She had become, in a quiet way, the space between things. Not absence, not presence, but transition. Erna walked the boundaries now. Her feet knew the mossy stones and the places where foxes still pressed soft prints into the wet soil. She spoke to the trees when the light changed, not always aloud, sometimes just by standing still, long enough for the wind to answer her. She had begun to braid her hair differently, not as Svala did, or Alva, but in a single long plait down her back, tied with a thin strip of ash leaf dyed linen. The villagers noticed. So did the land. The animals watched her more calmly now. A pair of cranes followed her to the edge of the barley field one morning and remained there long after she'd left, their heads cocked as if listening. Alva smiled when she saw them. "She has the rhythm," she said to Svala that evening. "It's in her bones now." Svala only nodded. She was mending a broken handle on a knife carved with runes that had nearly faded with use. "Rhythm doesn't ask permission," she said. "It just becomes." The next morning, Erna woke with a dream in her mouth. She said nothing of it until after dusk, when the sky turned violet and the hearth had been banked low. Then she sat across from Leif and said, "I saw the longhouse." Leif looked up from his scrolls. "Asa's?" Erna shook her head. "No, one I've never seen, but I knew it. It had no roof, only sky, but the walls were made of bone." Leif said nothing. "And in the center," Erna continued, "was a woman, but I couldn't see her face. She was carving names into the dirt, names that sounded like wind. I knew one of them was mine." She fell quiet. Leif leaned forward, speaking softly. "Do you remember any of the names?" Erna hesitated, then nodded. "I think they were names we haven't earned yet." The dream spread, not just Erna's. Others began waking with strange phrases on their tongues, with sensations that didn't match their days. The feeling of walking barefoot on stone they hadn't touched, the scent of a herb they hadn't boiled, the sound of breathing in a room alone. It wasn't haunting. It was remembering. Brynja said, "Something's coming." Svala answered, "No, something's arriving." And so they prepared, not with weapons, not with prayers, with threads. Alva taught the village girls to dye linen with boiled petals, not just ash leaf, but crowberry, elderflower, and dried moss. Leif returned to the cave where he had once found the faceless carving, and this time he sat for 3 days and 3 nights, fasting, with only pine bark and river water. When he returned, He brought nothing in his hands, only a voice more sure, and a small line of new symbols traced in soot along his forearm. He would not explain them, but Svala nodded when she saw them. "You've remembered something older than teaching," she said. When the strangers came again, it was not by boat. They came by foot, 7 of them, 3 men, 3 women, and a child no older than 5. They wore plain wool cloaks, but around their necks, braided rope, tight, restrained, not for style, for control. They entered the village at dusk, faces open, but eyes cautious. They asked not for food, but for a name. "We seek the one who listens." Erna stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "I listen," she said. The tallest among them, a gray-haired woman with frost-cracked lips, bowed her head slightly. "Then we've come to the right place." They were not seekers, not missionaries, not messengers. They were remnants, refugees from a place where the spiral had been broken, where fire was used not to warm, but to warn. They spoke of burned books, of silenced children, of herbs outlawed because they bloomed without permission. Svala listened to their stories, not with sorrow, with stillness. When they finished, she stood and walked to the center of the longhouse. There, she drew a circle in the ash, then a second, overlapping it, then a third. Then she stepped aside. And the child, the one whose eyes had not blinked once during the stories, stepped forward and placed a pebble in the center of the joined circles. A perfect spiral. Nothing was said, but everything shifted. In the days that followed, the village grew, not in houses, but in threads. New stories began to braid themselves with old ones. Erna showed the child where the ash leaf grew. Alva taught one of the women how to seal roots in beeswax. Leaf sang a wordless tune by the riverside, and the men followed it as though it were a trail. And Svala rested, not out of weariness, but of completion. She spent her mornings with her hands in the earth, her afternoons with a basket of nettlecord, and her evenings walking just to hear the sky darken. One night, she didn't return, not because she was lost, because she had left. At the spiral stones, a pouch was found. Inside, the 2 pendants, the circle and the wave, wrapped in a cloth threaded with her own hair. No message, no sign, just that. Erna took them in her hands and held them to her heart. No one cried, no one called out. They only stood beneath the pines and listened. And when the wind passed through, it carried not her name, but her rhythm. Tonight, the world exhales in long, even breaths. Not cold, not warm, just quiet. Like a hush that drapes over everything and asks nothing but stillness in return. The fire is soft. The walls creak like old trees in windless woods. You do not need to understand everything to belong to it. Let the story guide you, like a hand on your back, steady and slow. There is no rush. What must be remembered will always wait. Erna did not wear both pendants. She wore neither. Instead, she placed them on the high beam above her sleeping mat, one on each side, the circle and the wave, strung between 2 feathers taken from a winter owl found by the river. They were not decoration. They were breath. They were pause. After Svala left, Erna spoke less. Her steps became slower, her eyes more distant. Not empty, but full of something she was not yet ready to name. The others watched. Brynja brought her fresh elder leaves and did not ask questions. Leaf sat with her beside the stream and drew lines in the mud with a stick. Not runes, not symbols, just movement. And Erna watched until the water washed them away. Alva, one evening, placed her hand on Erna's shoulder and said, "When you are ready, we'll follow." Erna nodded, but said nothing. She was not becoming the new Svala. She was not replacing Asa. She was becoming what had not yet been spoken. In the early autumn, the trees turned slowly. The ash leaf did not drop its petals, even as other flowers curled into themselves. Travelers still came, one by one, or in quiet pairs. Most had no stories they could tell without trembling. Some had no language at all. One woman arrived mute, her eyes ringed with ink-black tattoos shaped like crescent moons. She pointed to the sky, then to her chest, then to Erna, and smiled. Erna gave her a room and placed a warm stone under her blanket. The woman stayed for a full moon cycle, helping gather wood, never asking for thanks. When she left, she touched Erna's forehead and whispered a single word, Stillroot. No one knew the word, but the ground beneath Erna's door sprouted a plant no one had ever grown, low, dark green, and scented faintly of smoke and lemon. She ground its leaves into paste and gave it to an elder whose cough had not quieted since midwinter. He slept the whole night through for the first time in weeks. Stillroot. They planted more. One morning, Erna woke before dawn. The sky was pearl gray, thick with mist, no birds, no footsteps, just the faint murmur of the world holding its breath. She walked to the spiral stones barefoot. The grass was wet, but not cold. When she reached the ridge, she sat and waited. Nothing came, and that was the answer. She closed her eyes and placed her hands on her knees. She did not pray. She remembered. Then, when the light touched the far trees, she stood, walked back, and went to the hearth. That day, she wove a new cord, thinner than the others, made not with ash leaf, but with flax and strands of wool pulled from a tunic left long ago in Svala's chest. She did not wear it. She placed it above the doorway. When Leif saw it, he asked, "Is it time?" Erna looked at him, not surprised. "Yes." He told the others. No one wept. They packed what they needed, and on the third day, they followed her. They did not leave the village. They extended it, outward, past the stream, through the birch woods, to a flat, wind-swept stretch of land where the earth rose gently into a crescent ridge. It had been empty for generations. No one farmed there. No one built. But the ground was soft, the air clearer. They brought stones, small ones at first, then larger, not to build walls, but to trace shapes, circles, spirals, lines that bent without breaking. Children helped. They thought it was a game. Erna let them believe it. By first frost, they had formed a shape none of them could name, though all of them recognized. It had no straight lines. But it held together like memory. And in the center, Erna placed a bowl, carved from driftwood, lined with clay, filled with nothing but water. No coin, no offering, just water, clear, still. They lit no torches. They rang no bells. But from that day on, people came not only to seek healing. They came to sit. Some came to speak. Some came to weep. Some only to place a hand on the stone, or dip a finger into the bowl, or rest their forehead against the dirt. There were no rules, only rhythm, and that was enough. One night, Erna woke with a feeling like light behind her ribs. Not pain, not joy. More like a doorway opening inside her chest. She walked out beneath the stars, hair unbraided. The spiral stones were glowing faintly, not with light, but with warmth. She touched the smaller one, the one that had grown beside the first. It pulsed under her fingers, and she whispered, "I'm ready." The next morning, she told the listeners what she had seen. Not in dreams, in knowing. "There will be others," she said. "They are not coming to destroy. They are coming because they are afraid." Leif asked, "Of us?" "No," she said. "Of the parts of themselves they buried." Alva asked, "What do we do?" Erna smiled. "We show them that silence can be shared, that memory can be kind." And so they waited. Not in fear, in welcome. It was weeks later when the first figures appeared. 3. Women, older. They had walked far. Their shoes were worn to thread. Their hands were empty. But when they reached the bowl at the center of the stone ring, they did not ask for anything. They knelt, dipped their fingers into the water, and one of them whispered, "She told us to come." No one asked who. They didn't need to. There's a hush that comes after understanding. It does not rush in like joy, or settle heavy like grief. It drifts, like wood smoke rising after a long-held breath. Tonight, that hush lingers. It curls along the doorway. It flickers in the lamp's glow. Let yourself settle into that space, the one where answers do not speak, but simply rest beside you, like a presence you've always known. The fire is low, the story carries on, gentle as ever. The three women did not leave. They stayed, though they asked for no roof. They slept beneath the lean of an old pine where the wind did not reach. They did not speak often, but when they did, it was with voices like dry leaves, voices that had learned not to hurry. Erna asked their names only once. They answered with gestures, a hand to the heart, a hand to the sky, a hand to the soil. Not because they had forgotten, but because names no longer held them. Each evening, they returned to the bowl at the center of the stone ring. They dipped their fingers into the water, not for blessing, not for cleansing, for remembering. On the fourth night, one of them sang. Not a song of melody, but one of breath. Exhale and hum, pause and murmur. The children who heard it fell asleep where they sat, and in the morning, the bowl was no longer full. The water had sunk into the earth, but beneath it, something soft had grown. A root, pale as milk, pushing gently upward, not a sprout, but the sign of one. Erna said nothing. She only placed a single ash leaf petal over it. The message was clear. Some things begin beneath. That same week, the child with the ink-ringed eyes returned. Not alone this time. With her came a man missing 3 fingers, a girl with a tattoo of stars across her scalp, and a boy no older than 10 who carried a bird skull tied to his belt. They did not explain themselves. They sat and were welcome. The village did not ask questions. They had learned, by now, that arrivals carried their own gravity, and that stories needed soil more than listeners. Brynja brought them a bundle of dried berries. Leif offered a thread of honeyed cord. Alva placed a sleeping mat by the fire, then simply nodded toward it. Erna, watching, said, "They are not here to learn." And they weren't. They were here to remind that the spiral does not turn forward only. It loops, returns, waits, begins again. That night, Erna dreamed of snow. Not cold, not blinding, just snow, falling on green earth. She walked barefoot through it, not shivering, not sinking. Beneath the snow, flowers still bloomed. Deep red, pale gold, violet like bruised sky. And in the distance, a figure stood. She thought, at first, it was Svala. But when the figure turned, the face was not known. Not old, not young, not hers, but not separate from her either. The figure lifted its hands, palms open. Erna did the same, and the snow stopped falling. She woke with a taste like nettle and mint in her mouth, and her hands tingled long after. She told no one of the dream. She didn't need to. Its echo would arrive soon enough. The harvest that year was thin, not failed, just slower. The grains came late. The roots were smaller. The goats gave less milk. But no one grew angry. They adjusted. They traded more, shared more. One day, a woman who had never spoken to Erna before, a weaver known more for sharp glances than soft hands, came with 3 spools of dyed wool. "I've nothing to offer the stones," she said, "but my daughter has stopped crying in her sleep since you gave her that charm." Erna took the wool. "You don't need to offer anything," she said, "but thank you." The woman nodded once, and her hands, calloused and ink-stained, lingered a moment, before letting go of the bundle. She returned the next day with buttons carved from birch. The day after that, she brought her daughter, and together they sat beside the listeners, helping sort dried leaves into packets. They never asked what the herbs were for. They just folded, tied, and stayed. At the end of that month, the priest came, not with soldiers, not with fire, just a man on a horse, trailing dust. He bore no badge, no title, only a voice smooth from years of preaching. He stood in the village square and spoke not of sin, but of safety, of mercy, of the burden of old practices. He smiled often, paused for questions, but none came. Erna did not step forward. She remained seated beside the spiral stones, hands folded in her lap, eyes on the bowl. The priest approached slowly. "You carry a great weight," he said kindly. "I do," she replied. "It need not be yours alone." She tilted her head. "It never was." He hesitated. "I mean, the path you walk, the power you hold, it can be given to a higher order, shared in Scripture." She looked at him. "I do not hold power," she said. "I carry memory, and memory does not answer to Scripture." He tried again. "There are those above who would honor what you've done, if you brought it into light." Erna turned her palms up. "It is already in the light. You're standing in it." The priest looked around, at the villagers, at the bowl, at the stones, at the flowers blooming even near his feet. And for the first time, he said nothing. He left at dawn. No threats, no blessings. Only a silence that did not return with him. That winter, the bowl at the center of the stones froze for the first time in 3 years, but the root beneath it grew. The listeners took turns keeping a candle lit beside it, a single flame, not to warm the root, but to remind it that even frozen earth remembers the sun. There is a kind of snow that falls without sound, not driven by wind or storm, but lowered gently, flake by flake, as if the sky itself is remembering how to whisper. Tonight, the snow returns, not to cover, but to soften. Let it settle on your thoughts, on your shoulders, across the footsteps you've taken to get here. The fire still flickers, the story still holds, and in the hush of this long white breath, we walk on. The frost that winter was deep. Rime rhymed the wooden beams of longhouses. The river slowed to a sluggish hum beneath plates of dull gray ice. Smoke hung longer above the roofs, thicker now, unwilling to rise quickly through the heavy air, and still, no one spoke of hunger. The stores had been modest, the harvest lean, but meals were shared before they were measured. Even the small things, a root, a spoon of berries, a warm stone in a sleeping bundle, were passed without fanfare. The spiral stone circle stood still, beneath a crust of snow, white gathering in the crevices between the curves. And the bowl, frozen solid, shone under moonlight like polished glass. Each evening, someone brushed the snow away from its rim, not to use it, just to keep it from disappearing. Leaf took that task most often. Some nights, he'd hum to it, while brushing the frost with the sleeve of his cloak. Other times, he'd sit cross-legged nearby, drawing breath into his chest as if the act of breathing near it helped it remember spring. No one asked him why. They all understood. Erna spent most days indoors now, not hiding, not ill, only inward. She kept the fire low, brewed no large pots, sat often in the dimness with hands folded on her knees, listening not to sound, but to shift. Brynja visited often, saying little. Sometimes she brought goat's milk, sometimes bits of fleece, sometimes only silence. Alva came every third morning with dried rosehip tea, letting it steep beside the hearth. Erna drank when it cooled. She was not fading. She was preparing. One evening, she called for Leif. He came at once. They sat on either side of the fire, both cross-legged, both quiet. Finally, Erna reached beneath her sleeping mat. She withdrew a pouch, one none of them had seen since Svala's departure. Inside, the two pendants, the wave, the circle, both wrapped in a strip of cloth still threaded with a single silver hair. She held them out to him. He did not reach for them, not at first. Instead, he asked, "Are you certain?" Erna smiled, small and soft. "Nothing is certain, but this is true." He took them, placed them in his lap, the wave in one hand, the circle in the other. "Do I wear them?" "No," she said. "You carry them." He bowed his head, and the fire hissed as a knot in the wood released its breath. The next morning, a bird flew into the village. It was black. Not crow, not raven. Smaller, sleeker. It landed on the edge of the bowl, tapped its beak against the ice once, twice, then flew away. When they checked the bowl, the ice had cracked. A single, clean line from edge to edge. By midday, the crack had widened. By dusk, water pooled above the root again. The first thaw. Too early, the elders said, but none spoke it with fear. Erna stepped out that night for the first time in weeks. She stood beside the bowl, bareheaded despite the cold, and looked not at the root, but at the stars. Leaf came to stand beside her. She said only, "When the flowers return, I will go." He did not ask where. The question was already answered in her breath. Spring came slowly. It peeled winter back one breath at a time. The snow didn't melt. It receded, softened, withdrew, and where it passed, green curled up like an old song remembered. Ash leaves were the first to bloom. Of course they were. They pushed up from old patches and new ones alike. Even between stones no one had touched in seasons. The bowl no longer froze at night, and the root beneath it began to twist. Not upward, but outward, sending threads of itself in gentle spirals beneath the ring. Children felt it under their bare feet and giggled, saying it tickled. Erna smiled. Each evening, she walked once around the ring, not circling it, threading it, as if winding time. The day came when the wind blew from the east again, but it carried no scent of fire this time, only salt and voices. They arrived at dusk, not soldiers, not messengers, just travelers, 10 of them, led by a woman, older than most, with eyes like smoke and a cane carved from rowan wood. They said they had come from a place where women were no longer allowed to speak after dark, where infants who cried too long were taken from their mothers and blessed by strangers with covered faces, where gardens were burned when herbs bloomed out of season. Erna said, "You're home now." And the woman, leaning heavily on her cane, replied, "I think we always were." That night, Erna lit a fire in the center of the ring. Not large, just steady, and she laid her hands on either side of the bowl. "Tomorrow," she said, "I will walk." No one stopped her, but none looked away. Dawn came with mist. The village was quiet. Even the animals seemed to sense the shape of it. Erna, dressed in flax and wool, her feet bare. She carried nothing, not a pouch, not a blade, not a charm, only breath. She stepped onto the boundary path and began to walk. Not fast, not slow, just present. Leaf stood at the spiral stones with both pendants strung together in his hands. Alva lit a line of small candles along the east ridge. Brynja sang a single low note, not song, not hum, and let it linger. The children placed their palms on the ground, and the flowers stayed open even as the mist thickened. Erna's figure faded from view, swallowed gently by the trees. No one followed. No one needed to. The village did not cry. They did not wait. They returned to their weaving, to their boiling, to their tending. The spiral had turned again, and in its center, the bowl remained, not full, not empty, just ready. The air tonight holds the scent of damp earth and the faint trace of pine sap, softened by the hush of falling leaves. The sky above is a deep velvet, pierced by cold stars that seem to hold their breath as the night unfolds. Rest now. Let your thoughts dissolve like mist in morning light. The story moves quietly, gently, as a river, carving stone, patient and sure. The village carried on, without Erna's footsteps marking its paths, but her presence lingered, like a shadow in soft sunlight, always there, but never harsh. Leaf took up the task of tending the spiral stones. He brushed the moss from their surfaces, repaired cracks, and kept the bowl filled with clear water from the mountain springs. When no one was watching, he would trace symbols in the frost and murmur old names. Alva kept the fire burning steady, weaving new chords and teaching the children the rhythm of roots and breath. Brynja disappeared one morning, without fanfare or farewell. Some said she had followed the wind north, to a place where wild things still whispered secrets. Others believed she had become part of the forest itself, a knot in the bark, a shimmer beneath leaves. The listeners gathered often near the spiral stones, not to speak, but to share silence. And in that silence, they remembered. Winter approached again, but this time it was not as cold. The frost was lighter. The river did not freeze solid. The sky, even on the darkest nights, held a faint glow, as if the stars themselves had learned to keep watch. One evening, as the village settled beneath a new quilt of snow, a visitor arrived. She was young, her hair the color of ripe wheat, her eyes steady, like river stones. She carried a bundle of herbs and a carved flute. She called herself Freya. She said she had heard stories, not of fear, but of courage. She had traveled far, across lands scorched by fire and ruled by silence. She wanted to learn. The village was cautious, but Erna's listeners remembered their own beginnings. They welcomed Freya not as an outsider, but as part of the circle. She sat with Alva, learning to bind herbs with flax and nettle. She sat with Leif, listening to the rhythms he traced in the ash. She sat with the children, teaching them songs not in words, but in breath and wind. Svala's name was spoken again, not with fear, but with respect. Freya said, "I want to carry it forward," and the listeners smiled, because they knew the spiral turns always. One morning, Freya found a small stone beneath the ash leaf patch. It was smooth, round, and warm to the touch. She brought it to Leif. He looked at it closely. "It's a memory," he said. "Of what?" He smiled, "that it's never truly lost." They placed it at the center of the stone ring. And that night, for the first time in many years, the bowl overflowed. Clear water spilling over stone. A quiet promise.
Kiptas masos Crete.
Erna's absence was felt, but no one mourned as before. They knew she had become part of the earth she had tended. A root beneath roots, a whisper beneath wind. One evening, Freya stood by the spiral stones. She placed the carved flute upon the frozen bowl, raised it to her lips, and breathed. Not a song, not a chant, but a calling. The sound echoed soft and low, felt rather than heard. The village listened, not with ears, but with hearts. And in that moment, the spiral expanded. A circle, becoming larger, stronger, ready. The seasons will turn again. The story will continue. But for now, let the fire dim, let the night deepen, and know that in every breath, in every step, in every silent pause, memory lives. And so do we. The air tonight carries a gentle chill, a whisper of winter's approach, yet softened by the lingering warmth of autumn's last embrace. Leaves murmur underfoot, a quiet rustling that speaks of endings and beginnings intertwined. The sky, a vast canvas, is brushed with stars that shimmer faintly like distant fires, steady and calm. In this soft darkness, settle in. Let your thoughts become as slow and deep as the earth beneath us, and listen once more to the story that threads through time, the story of memory, courage, and the women who bore it. Freya's flute sang low beneath the ancient stones, its notes weaving through the trees, carrying secrets not meant for hurried ears. The village gathered in silence, drawn not by command, but by a quiet knowing that something old and true was stirring once again. The notes flowed like water, gentle yet persistent, echoing the rhythm of the river and the pulse of the earth. It was a song of welcome, of continuation, and the space between endings. As the last notes faded, Freya lowered the flute and turned to the circle gathered before her. Faces worn by seasons and softened by understanding looked back with eyes that held the weight of stories too long buried. Among them were Alva, her fingers still stained with dye, Leaf with soot beneath his nails, and the children whose laughter had become the light threading through the village. Freya spoke then, her voice steady, like the rocks beneath their feet. The spiral does not end here. It moves forward, outward, and within. We carry the past not to be trapped by it, but to be guided. She gestured to the stone circle, where the bowl still shimmered with water, now overflowing gently onto the earth, nurturing roots unseen. It is our turn to listen, to tend, and to walk the path that remembers. The elders nodded, the children smiled, and the fire's glow deepened, casting long shadows that danced with the promise of tomorrow. For in this village, beneath the silent watch of the stars and the steady heart of the spiral, the legacy of the wise women lived on, not as fear or superstition, but as a living, breathing thread woven through the fabric of their lives. As you drift now toward rest, imagine the soft flicker of that fire, the steady hum of the flute's last note, and the quiet strength of those who choose to remember. Let it carry you gently into dreams where stories unfold like petals, and where the spiral turns ever onward, welcoming you home. The night is deep and still, the kind of quiet that settles softly over the world, inviting you to sink beneath its calm embrace. The cold stars hang distant and steady, their light reaching out like gentle hands to brush the tops of firs and the ripples of dark water. Here, in this peaceful moment, the story unfolds again, slowly, quietly, without rush, like a river winding its way through ancient forests, carrying secrets that never fade. Let your breath match the rhythm of the night, and let your mind drift with the tale that has carried generations. The village moved with the turning of the seasons, but beneath the surface of daily life, something deeper took root, a legacy passed down not in words alone, but in the silent spaces between them. Freya's song had opened a new thread in the spiral, a thread woven of hope and remembrance, ready to be carried forward. Days lengthened into months, and the people began to gather once more, not in fear or suspicion, but in quiet reverence for the old ways made new. The herbs were tended carefully, the bundles prepared with practiced hands. The children learned not only the songs and stories, but also the rhythm of listening to the wind, the earth, and to each other. Leaf spent long hours mapping dreams in ash and soot, teaching those who would watch how to read the unspoken language of the heart. Alva's fingers wove cords and ties that bound not only fabric, but also the bonds of community, strong and flexible. Brynja, though no longer seen, remained a presence in the wild places, whispered about as the woman who had become one with the forest. Erna, once the quiet listener, had grown into her role as guide and guardian of memory. Though her footsteps were rarely seen, her influence wove through the village like the roots beneath the stones. The spiral stones themselves, worn smooth by generations of hands, bore the touch of countless prayers and promises. One crisp morning, as the frost glimmered on the grass and the river murmured softly through the valley, a stranger appeared at the village's edge. Cloaked in worn wool, her eyes sharp and clear, she carried a small leather satchel adorned with carved symbols. She introduced herself as Era, a traveler from distant lands who had heard the stories carried on the winds, stories of a place where the old ways still breathed beneath the surface of modern fear. The villagers, guided by the listeners, welcomed her gently. Era joined in the tending of herbs and the weaving of cords. She shared tales of faraway places where women like them had been silenced, and others where they had thrived in secret, keeping the flame alive. Her knowledge enriched the community, threading new colors into the fabric of their shared life. As autumn painted the hills with gold and crimson, the village prepared for the gathering, a ceremony not of spectacle, but of remembrance. Beneath the great pine where the spiral stone stood, the people gathered to honor those who had come before, and those who would carry the flame ahead. Freya's flute sang once more, its notes weaving through the branches and the hearts of those who listened. The song spoke not only of endings, but of beginnings, the endless turning of the spiral, the eternal cycle of loss and renewal. Erna stood beside the bowl at the center of the stones. She held the two pendants, the circle and the wave, that had been passed down through generations. With hand steady and voice soft, she spoke the names of the women who had come before, naming not just their deeds, but their courage, their fears, and their love. The villagers listened, their hearts echoing the words like a sacred chant. When the song ended and the last name was spoken, the fire burned brighter, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the past and the future entwined. And in that moment, beneath the vast night sky, the story paused, not to end, but to breathe, to wait for the next breath, the next step, the next remembering. As your eyes grow heavy and your breath slows, let the quiet strength of this place carry you gently into sleep. Imagine the soft flicker of the fire, the steady pulse of the flute's last note, and the eternal turning of the spiral, a circle without end, welcoming you home. The night wraps itself around the village like a soft cloak, the kind that muffles sounds and slows time until even the smallest breath feels like a vast unfolding. The stars overhead flicker like ancient lanterns, steady and unchanging. Their light a gentle reminder of stories passed from one generation to the next. Let your mind settle into this calm space, where the past and present meet, and the spiral of memory continues to turn with quiet determination. Freya's arrival had breathed new life into the village's ancient traditions, weaving fresh threads into the fabric of remembrance. The children, once shy and uncertain, now played beneath the tall pines, their laughter ringing like clear bells through the crisp air. They learned not only to tend the herbs and weave the cords, but to listen to the wind, the river, and the whispers of the earth itself. Leif had grown into his role as a keeper of dreams, mapping visions in ash and soot, teaching others to understand the language of the unseen. His hands, once rough from labor, moved with the gentle precision of a scribe, tracing symbols that held stories of loss and hope. Alva's weaving became a language in its own right, each knot and twist carrying meaning beyond mere fabric. And Brynja's spirit, though absent in body, lingered in the wild places, felt in the rustle of leaves and the flicker of shadows. Erna, now a woman who moved with quiet authority, carried the legacy of her predecessors with grace. Though her presence was subtle, it was deeply felt, like the steady pulse beneath the village's breath. The spiral stones, worn smooth by countless hands, bore the imprint of her care, as did the bowl at their center, which shimmered with the clear waters of the mountain springs. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in hues of amber and rose, a group of travelers appeared at the village boundary. Cloaked in weathered wool and carrying bundles tied with leather straps, they moved with a purpose born of hardship and hope. Their faces were etched with stories of distant lands and silent struggles. The villagers, guided by the listeners, welcomed them without hesitation. Freya took it upon herself to gather herbs and prepare soothing teas, while Leif shared the ancient symbols with the curious newcomers. Alva taught the weaving of cords that bound not only threads but hearts, and Erna offered quiet counsel and steady hands. The travelers spoke of places where the old ways had been hunted like shadows, where women were silenced and children forbidden to dream. They carried the weight of forgotten songs and hidden knowledge, but within the village's embrace, they found a refuge, a place where memory was not feared but honored. As autumn's chill crept into the air, the village prepared for the gathering beneath the great pine where the spiral stone stood. The ceremony was simple yet profound, a testament to the enduring power of remembrance. Freya's flute sang once more, its notes weaving a tapestry of sound that wrapped around the hearts of all who listened. Erna stood by the bowl at the center of the stones, the pendants circle and wave, resting gently in her hands. Her voice, steady and clear, named the women who had come before, their courage, their fears, their love. The villagers responded in silence, their hearts resonating with the sacred chant. As the song faded, the fire burned brighter, casting flickering shadows that danced with the past and future entwined. Under the vast night sky, the story paused, a breath held between the turns of the spiral, waiting for the next breath, the next step, the next remembering. And as your eyelids grow heavy and your breath slows, let the quiet strength of this place carry you gently into sleep. Imagine the soft flicker of the fire, the steady pulse of the flute's last note, and the eternal turning of the spiral, a circle without end, welcoming you home. The village lay under a silver sky, the pale light of dawn stretching across fields glistening with frost. The air was crisp and still, a silence so deep it seemed to hold the world in gentle suspension. You feel it too, the calm that comes before the slow unfurling of day, the breath drawn between two heartbeats. Here, where the earth meets sky, the story breathes on, soft and steady, like the river flowing beneath frozen ice. Since the arrival of Freya, the village had grown in ways both seen and unseen. Children chased shadows and whispered to the trees, learning songs older than their parents. The elders gathered beneath the ancient pines to share stories, their voices low and full of reverence. Every day, the spiral stones felt the touch of new hands, each leaving a mark like a quiet prayer. Leif continued his work with the ash and soot, his drawings a language that bound the past to the present. Alva's weaving became an art, intricate cords braided with meanings only those who listened could understand. The villagers no longer spoke of fear or superstition, but of honor and remembrance. Erna had become a quiet pillar in this living community. Though she rarely spoke in gatherings, her presence was felt deeply, a steady heartbeat beneath the village's pulse. The pendants once worn by those who came before hung from her neck, not as symbols of power, but as reminders of responsibility and connection. One crisp morning, as the sun poured light like honey over the hills, a figure approached from the forest path. Clad in simple cloth, the traveler carried no burden, but walked with the certainty of one who had found her way home. She introduced herself as Liv, a seeker of old ways and hidden wisdom, drawn by the tales carried on the wind. The villagers welcomed her with open hands and open hearts. Liv's knowledge of herbs and healing was vast, yet she listened as much as she taught. Her voice, soft but sure, blended with the chorus of voices preserving ancient memory. Together, they tended the earth and the people, weaving the threads of past and present into a tapestry strong enough to withstand the coming storms. They knew the peace was fragile, the world beyond still restless. As autumn's golden light began to fade into the cool embrace of winter, the village prepared once more to gather beneath the great pine and the spiral stones. It was a ceremony without ceremony, a gathering of souls bound by remembrance and hope. Freya's flute sang through the evening air, its notes weaving like silver threads through the trees and hearts alike. The fire at the center crackled warmly, a beacon in the growing dark. Erna stepped forward, holding the pendants with reverence. Her voice rose, naming the wise women who had come before, their courage and sacrifices etched into the very fabric of the village. The names wove a spell of memory and strength, binding all who listened into the endless spiral of time. As the last name was spoken, the fire flared briefly, casting dancing shadows that seemed to reach back through generations. The night held its breath, then exhaled softly as the stars blinked in silent applause. The story was not over. It was only beginning anew. Each turn of the spiral a promise of endurance and renewal. Now, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath slows, let the quiet strength of this tale settle into your bones. Imagine the soft flicker of the fire, the steady pulse of the flute's last note, and the gentle turning of the spiral, a circle unbroken, welcoming you home. Greetings, my restless moonlit travelers. The night holds its breath with you, soft and steady, as the story weaves on like the river's endless song. Beneath the pale stars, the village stirs, not in haste, but with the careful, patient rhythms of the earth itself, breathing in silence, exhaling memory. In this quiet, time folds gently, and the spiral of the wise women's legacy winds deeper into the fabric of the land. The years had softened the edges of fear and suspicion like smooth river stones, but the stories, like roots, ran deep beneath the village. Freya's arrival brought a new thread of hope woven carefully alongside old strands of remembrance. The children, now children no longer, but young keepers of the flame, learned the songs that carried no words but held the weight of countless generations. The elders gathered beneath the ancient pines, voices low and steady, sharing tales that were neither beginning nor end, but the ever-turning spiral itself. Leaf continued to draw dreams in ash and soot, teaching others to read the silent language of the heart, while Alva wove cords of flax and wool, each knot binding past to present with whispered meaning. Brynja, whose body had become one with the forest, lingered still in every rustle of leaves and flicker of shadow. Erna had become the quiet heartbeat beneath it all, her presence felt in every gesture, every breath. The pendants, circle and wave, hung against her chest, not as trophies, but as reminders of the responsibility she bore. One misty morning, as dawn's light spilled like liquid gold over frost-kissed fields, a stranger came to the village. Cloaked in worn wool and carrying a small leather satchel adorned with carved symbols, she introduced herself as Era. She had traveled far, guided by the whispered stories on the wind, stories of a place where the old ways still breathed beneath modern fear. The villagers, led by the listeners, welcomed her gently. Era joined in tending herbs and weaving cords, sharing tales of distant lands where women like them were silenced, yet kept the flame alive in secret. Her knowledge enriched their tapestry, threading new colors into the fabric of their lives. As autumn painted the hills in fiery hues, the village prepared to gather beneath the great pine where the spiral stone stood. The ceremony was simple, profound, a testament to the enduring power of remembrance. Freya's flute sang once more, its notes weaving through branches and hearts alike. Erna stood by the bowl at the circle's center, the pendants resting in her hands. Her voice, steady and clear, named the women who came before, their courage, fears, and love. The villagers responded in silence, their hearts echoing the sacred chant. As the song faded and the fire burned brighter, shadows danced, past and future, entwined beneath the vast night sky. The story paused not to end, but to breathe, awaiting the next breath, the next step, the next remembering. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy and breath slows, let the quiet strength of this place carry you gently into sleep. Imagine the fire's flicker, the flute's steady pulse, and the eternal spiral's gentle turn, a circle without end, welcoming you home. There's a certain stillness that settles over the world just before dawn, when even the wind pauses as if listening to a secret long kept. The night is thick with shadows, yet soft, like velvet folded around the earth, and the stars gleam faintly, steady and knowing. Let yourself drift within this calm, your breath slowing to match the quiet rhythm of the village below, where stories of wise women weave like threads through time, unbroken, enduring, patient. The spiral continues to turn. With Freya's arrival, the village's ancient legacy breathed anew. Children, once shy in the dark woods, now played beneath tall pines, their laughter carrying the old songs learned not in words, but in feeling and breath. Elders gathered beneath the great pines to share tales, their voices low with reverence, passing wisdom from one to the next. The spiral stones, worn smooth by countless hands, bore witness to this sacred gathering, their surfaces gleaming in the morning sun. Leaf, keeper of dreams, continued his sacred work, drawing visions in ash and soot, teaching others the language of the unseen. Alva's weaving grew into an art form, cords braided with meaning only those who listened could understand. Brynja, though no longer present in body, lived on in the forest's whispers and the rustling leaves. Erna, once a quiet listener, became the village's steady heart, carrying the legacy forward with grace and humility. Though her footsteps were rarely seen, her influence pulsed beneath the village's breath. The pendants, circle and wave, rested close to her, symbols not of power, but of responsibility and connection. One crisp morning, a new figure emerged from the forest's edge, clad in simple cloth, eyes clear and steady like river stones. She introduced herself as Liv, a seeker drawn by stories carried on the wind. The villagers, guided by those who remembered, welcomed her with open hands and hearts. Liv's knowledge enriched the community, threading new colors into the tapestry of their shared life. As autumn's light waned, the village prepared for the gathering beneath the great pine and spiral stones. Freya's flute sang once more, weaving notes through the air like silver threads, wrapping around every heart present. Erna, standing by the bowl at the circle's center, held the pendants reverently, naming the wise women who had come before, honoring their courage, their fears, their love. The villagers listened in silence, their hearts resonating with the sacred chant. The fire flared briefly as the last name was spoken, casting shadows that danced through time. The night held its breath, then exhaled softly as stars blinked in quiet applause. The story was not ending. It was beginning anew. The spiral turning on, a promise of endurance and renewal. Now, as your breath slows and your eyelids grow heavy, let the quiet strength of this tale settle within you. Imagine the flickering firelight, the flute's gentle pulse, and the spiral's endless turning, a circle welcoming you home. There is a profound calm in the moment just before dawn, a silence that wraps the world in a soft, protective shroud. The stars above glisten faintly, their steady light like the watchful eyes of ancestors, guiding and steadying the path ahead. Within this tranquil stillness, let your breath match the gentle rhythm of the night, slow and deep, as the story continues to unfold, weaving ever onward like the eternal spiral. With Freya's arrival, the village's ancient heritage blossomed anew. The children, once hesitant in the shadows of the towering pines, now filled the woods with laughter and song, not in words alone, but in melodies carried by the wind, ancient and alive. The elders gathered beneath the great trees, their voices a soft murmur, sharing tales of courage, sorrow, and love passed from one generation to the next. The spiral stones, smooth from the touch of countless hands, reflected the morning sun's gentle glow, standing as silent witnesses to the enduring legacy. Leaf, the keeper of dreams, continued his sacred task. He traced visions in ash and soot, teaching the village to read the silent language of the heart, connecting past to present with each stroke. Alva's weaving became an art of profound meaning, her cords braided with symbols known only to those who truly listened. Brynja's spirit, though absent from their sight, lingered in the forest's whisper and the rustle of leaves, a guardian unseen yet deeply felt. Erna, once a quiet listener, emerged as the steady heartbeat of the village. Though seldom seen, her presence was woven into every breath, every gesture, every moment. The pendants, the circle, and the wave rested near her, not as tokens of power, but as emblems of responsibility and connection. One crisp morning, as golden light spilled over frost-kissed fields, a figure appeared at the village edge. Clad simply, her eyes clear and calm like river stones, she introduced herself as Liv, a seeker drawn by the whispered stories carried on the wind, tales of a place where the old ways still breathed beneath the shadow of modern fear. Guided by the listeners, the villagers welcomed her warmly. Liv shared her knowledge of healing and herbs with humility, listening as much as she taught. Her presence wove new colors into the village's tapestry, enriching the collective memory. As autumn painted the hills in fiery hues, preparations began for the gathering beneath the great pine and spiral stones. The ceremony was simple yet profound, a testament to remembrance's enduring power. Freya's flute sang softly, its notes weaving through the trees and hearts, wrapping all present in a sacred embrace. Erna stood by the bowl at the circle's center, the pendants resting in her hands. Her voice, steady and clear, named the wise women who had come before, honoring their courage, fears, and love. The villagers responded in hushed reverence, their hearts resonating with the sacred chant. As the song faded and the fire burned brighter, shadows danced, past and future entwined beneath the vast night sky. The story paused, not to end, but to breathe, awaiting the next breath, the next step, the next remembering. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy and your breath slows, let the quiet strength of this place carry you gently into sleep. Imagine the soft flicker of the fire, the steady pulse of the flute's last note, and the eternal turning of the spiral, a circle without end, welcoming you home. The night breathes slowly now, cool and gentle as a whispered promise. The stars above flicker faintly, their light soft and steady, casting a quiet glow over the village that has long embraced the rhythms of memory and time. In this serene moment, your thoughts may wander freely, as free as the wind, among the pines, carried by the unbroken spiral of stories that have passed through generations. The tale unfolds again, not hurriedly, but with the patient grace of the earth itself. Freya's presence had woven fresh threads into the village's ancient tapestry. Children, once shy and uncertain, now laughed beneath towering trees, their voices blending with the hum of life renewed. Elders gathered beneath the great pines, their stories flowing like gentle streams, each word a pebble in the river of collective memory. The spiral stones, worn smooth by countless hands, caught the morning light, shining like beacons of enduring wisdom. Leif, the keeper of dreams, continued his sacred work, drawing visions in ash and soot, teaching others the language of the unseen. Alva's weaving transformed into artful chords, each knot binding past and present with whispered meaning. Though Brynja's body was gone, her spirit lingered in the forest's whispers and the rustling leaves, a guardian unseen but deeply felt. Erna, once a quiet listener, had grown into a steady heart beneath the village's breath. The pendants, the circle, and the wave rested close to her, symbols not of power, but of responsibility and connection. Her steps were soft but certain, her presence a balm to the community's soul. One morning, as dawn spilled golden light across frost-kissed fields, a stranger appeared at the village's edge. Wrapped in simple cloth, her eyes clear and steady, like river stones, she introduced herself as Liv, a seeker drawn by whispered tales carried on the wind. The villagers, guided by those who remembered, welcomed her with open hearts. Liv shared her knowledge humbly, blending it with the old ways already alive in the village. Her voice, soft but sure, added new hues to the tapestry of their shared life. The community grew richer, not in wealth, but in the depth of their remembering. As autumn painted the hills in fiery colors, the village prepared once more to gather beneath the great pine and the spiral stones. Freya's flute sang through the evening air, weaving notes like silver threads through trees and hearts. Erna stood by the bowl at the circle's center, holding the pendants reverently. Her voice named the wise women who came before, honoring their courage, fears, and love. The villagers listened in silence, their hearts resonating with the sacred chant. As the last name was spoken, the fire flared, casting dancing shadows that entwined past and future beneath the vast night sky. The story was not ending, it was beginning anew. Each turn of the spiral promised endurance and renewal. Now, as your breath slows and your eyelids grow heavy, let this quiet strength settle within you. Imagine the flickering firelight, the steady pulse of the flute's last note, and the gentle turning of the spiral, a circle unbroken, welcoming you home. Greetings, my weary travelers, beneath the moon's tender glow. The night cradles you softly, as the whispers of ancient tales drift gently through the still air. The stars above shimmer quietly, steady sentinels lighting the path of memory and hope. In this sacred space between waking and sleep, we continue our journey, slow, calm, and sure, following the spiral of those wise women whose legacy turns ever onward like the quiet river beneath the earth. With Freya's arrival, the village's heartbeat grew stronger, weaving new threads into the ancient tapestry of remembrance. Children, once shy in the shadowed woods, now played beneath towering pines, their laughter blending with the rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of the river. The elders gathered beneath the great trees, their voices low and reverent, passing stories that bridged past and present, like a living bridge of breath and breath. Leaf, the keeper of dreams, traced visions in ash and soot, teaching those who would listen to read the language of the unseen. Alva's weaving became a sacred art, each knot and twist binding hearts as well as threads. Brynja, though no longer walking among them, lived on in the whispers of the forest and the flicker of shadows that danced beneath the moonlight. Erna, once a quiet listener, had grown into a steady pillar beneath the village's soul. Though her footsteps were seldom seen, her presence was felt in every gesture, every breath shared among the people. The pendants, the circle, and the wave rested close to her heart, symbols not of power, but of responsibility, connection, and the unbroken thread of memory. One crisp dawn, as the sun spilled honey gold across frost-kissed fields, a figure appeared at the village's edge. Cloaked simply, her eyes clear as river stones, she introduced herself as Liv, a seeker drawn by whispered stories carried on the wind. The villagers, guided by those who remembered, welcomed her with open hearts and hands. Liv shared her wisdom with humility, blending her knowledge with the old ways already living strong in the village. Her voice, soft but sure, added fresh hues to the vibrant tapestry they wove together. The community grew not in riches, but in the depth and resilience of their shared remembrance. As autumn painted the hills in fiery hues, the village prepared once more to gather beneath the great pine and the spiral stones. Freya's flute sang softly through the crisp evening air, its notes weaving silver threads around hearts and trees alike. Erna stood by the bowl at the circle's center, the pendants resting reverently in her hands. Her voice rose, naming the wise women who had come before, honoring their courage, their fears, and their love. The villagers listened in hushed reverence, their hearts resonating with the sacred chant. As the final name was spoken, the fire blazed bright, casting dancing shadows that entwined past and future beneath the vast night sky. The story paused, not to end, but to breathe, waiting for the next breath, the next step, the next remembering. Now, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath slows, let the quiet strength of this place carry you gently into sleep. Picture the flickering firelight, the steady pulse of the flute's last note, and the eternal turning of the spiral. A circle without end, welcoming you home. There is a gentle stillness in the hour before dawn, where the world holds its breath in delicate silence. The night sky, dark and expansive, is pierced by stars that shimmer quietly like distant fires, steady and watchful. Let your mind settle into this calm, your breathing slow and deep as the story unfolds like the endless spiral, soft, patient, and timeless. With Freya's arrival, the village's ancient rhythms deepened, weaving new threads into the tapestry of memory. Children, once shy in the forest shadows, now laughed freely beneath towering pines, their voices blending with the rustle of leaves and the whispering river. Elders gathered beneath great trees, their stories flowing gently from lips that carried the weight of generations. The spiral stones, smoothed by countless hands, caught the soft glow of dawn, standing as silent witnesses to enduring wisdom. Leif, keeper of dreams, continued his sacred work, tracing visions in ash and soot, teaching others the language of the unseen. Alva's weaving grew more intricate, cords braided with meaning understood only by those who truly listened. Though Brynja's body was gone, her spirit lingered in the forest's murmur and the flicker of shadows, a guardian unseen but deeply felt. Erna, once a quiet listener, had become the steady heart beneath the village's breath. The pendants, the circle, and the wave rested close to her, symbols not of power, but of responsibility and connection. Her steps were soft but certain, her presence a balm to the community's soul. One crisp morning, as golden light spilled across frost-kissed fields, a figure appeared at the village's edge. Clad in simple cloth, her eyes clear and calm, like river stones, she introduced herself as Liv, a seeker drawn by whispered tales carried on the wind, stories of a place where the old ways still breathed beneath modern fear. The villagers, guided by those who remembered, welcomed her warmly. Liv shared her knowledge with humility, blending her wisdom with the old ways alive in the village. Her voice, soft but sure, added new colors to their tapestry of shared life. The community grew richer, not in wealth, but in the depth of their remembering. As autumn painted the hills in fiery hues, the village prepared once more to gather beneath the great pine and the spiral stones. Freya's flute sang softly, its notes weaving through the trees and hearts alike, wrapping all present in a sacred embrace. Erna stood by the bowl at the circle's center, the pendants resting in her hands. Her voice named the wise women who had come before, their courage, their fears, and their love. The villagers responded in silence, their hearts resonating with the sacred chant. As the song faded and the fire burned brighter, shadows danced, past and future entwined beneath the vast night sky. The story paused, not to end, but to breathe, awaiting the next breath, the next step, the next remembering. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy and your breath slows, let the quiet strength of this place carry you gently into sleep. Imagine the soft flicker of the fire, the steady pulse of the flute's last note, and the eternal turning of the spiral. A circle without end, welcoming you home. The night cradles the village like a soft embrace, the stars above steady and quiet, bearing witness to stories told and those yet to be spoken. The air is cool, tinged with the scent of earth and pine, inviting your breath to slow and your thoughts to drift gently like leaves upon a river. Here, beneath the endless sky, the spiral of memory turns, carrying the legacy of wise women whose courage and wisdom shaped the very ground beneath their feet. Freya's arrival breathed new life into the village's ancient rhythms. Children once shy in the forest's shadow now laughed freely beneath towering pines, their voices mingling with the murmuring wind and the song of the river. Elders gathered beneath great trees, their stories weaving a tapestry of courage, love, and fear shared across generations. The spiral stones, worn smooth by countless hands, glimmered in the soft dawn light, silent sentinels guarding the legacy of those who came before. Leaf, keeper of dreams, continued his sacred task. He traced visions in ash and soot, teaching others the language of the unseen, connecting past and present through symbols that held more than mere meaning. Alva's weaving became an artful language, cords braided with threads of memory understood only by those who listened with their hearts. Though Brynja's body was gone, her spirit lingered in the forest's whispers and flickering shadows, a guardian unseen yet deeply felt. Erna, once a quiet listener, had become the steady heartbeat beneath the village's breath. The pendants, the circle, and the wave rested close to her, not as tokens of power, but as reminders of responsibility and connection. Her steps were soft but sure, her presence a balm for the community's soul. One crisp morning, as golden light spilled across frost-kissed fields, a figure appeared at the village's edge. Clad in simple cloth, her eyes clear and calm like river stones, she introduced herself as Liv, a seeker drawn by whispered tales carried on the wind. The villagers, guided by those who remembered, welcomed her warmly. Liv shared her knowledge with humility, blending her wisdom with the old ways alive in the village. Her voice, soft but sure, added new colors to their shared tapestry. As autumn painted the hills in fiery hues, the village prepared once more to gather beneath the great pine and the spiral stones. Freya's flute sang softly, weaving silver threads through the trees and hearts alike. Erna stood by the bowl at the circle's center, the pendants resting in her hands. Her voice rose, naming the wise women who had come before, their courage, fears, and love. The villagers listened in silence, hearts resonating with the sacred chant. As the song faded and the fire burned brighter, shadows danced, past and future entwined beneath the vast night sky. The story paused, not to end, but to breathe, awaiting the next breath, the next step, the next remembering. Now, as your eyelids grow heavy and your breath slows, let the quiet strength of this place carry you gently into sleep. Imagine the flickering firelight, the steady pulse of the flute's last note, and the eternal turning of the spiral, a circle without end, welcoming you home. The night unfolds softly, the world hushed beneath a canopy of shimmering stars, their quiet light a steady beacon across the vast darkness. The air is crisp and still, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth, inviting your breath to slow, your thoughts to drift gently like the swirling mists that curl through the valley. Here, in this peaceful moment, the spiral of the tale wanes onward, patient, unhurried, eternal. Freya's presence had rekindled the village's ancient heartbeat. Children who once tread quietly among the shadows now filled the forest with laughter and song, their voices blending with the rustling leaves and the gentle flow of the river. Beneath the towering pines, elders gathered, their voices low and reverent, weaving stories that spanned generations, tales of courage, sorrow, and love that breathed life into the timeless tapestry of memory. The spiral stones, worn smooth by countless hands, caught the first light of dawn, standing as silent sentinels guarding the sacred legacy. Leaf, the keeper of dreams, continued his sacred work. With fingers stained by ash and soot, he traced visions and symbols, teaching the villagers the silent language of the heart, binding the past to the present through his gentle artistry. Alva's weaving evolved into a sacred craft, her hands braiding cords, imbued with meaning, understood only by those who truly listened. Though Brynja's body was absent, her spirit lingered in the whispering forest, in the flickering shadows, a guardian unseen but profoundly felt. Erna, once a quiet listener, had become the steady heartbeat beneath the village's breath. The pendants, the circle, and the wave rested close to her, symbols not of power, but of responsibility and connection. Her steps were soft, yet sure, her presence a balm for the community's soul. One crisp morning, as golden light spilled across frost-kissed fields, a stranger arrived at the village's edge. Clad in simple cloth, her eyes clear and calm like river stones, she introduced herself as Liv, a seeker drawn by whispered tales carried on the wind, stories of a place where the old ways still breathe beneath modern fear. Guided by the listeners, the villagers welcomed her warmly. Liv shared her knowledge with humility, weaving her wisdom into the old ways alive in the village. Her voice, soft yet sure, added new hues to their shared tapestry. As autumn painted the hills in fiery hues, the village prepared once more to gather beneath the great pine and the spiral stones. Freya's flute sang softly, weaving silver threads through the trees and hearts alike, wrapping all present in a sacred embrace. Erna stood by the bowl at the circle's center, the pendants resting reverently in her hands. Her voice named the wise women who had come before, honoring their courage, fears, and love. The villagers listened in hushed reverence, their hearts resonating with the sacred chant. As the song faded and the fire burned brighter, shadows danced, past and future entwined beneath the vast night sky. The story paused, not to end but to breathe, awaiting the next breath, the next step, the next remembering. Now, as your breath slows and your eyelids grow heavy, let the quiet strength of this place carry you gently into sleep. Imagine the flickering firelight, the steady pulse of the flute's last note, and the eternal turning of the spiral, a circle without end, welcoming you home. The night has deepened into a quiet reverence, a sacred pause that stretches between breaths, between heartbeats. The stars above glimmer like distant fires, their soft light wrapping the village in an embrace older than memory itself. The air holds the scent of pine and earth, a reminder of roots that run deep beneath the soil. Let your mind drift slowly, like the gentle flow of the river, as the story moves on, steady, calm, eternal. Since Freya's arrival, the village had blossomed anew. Children, once timid in the forest shadows, now laughed with ease, their voices blending with the rustle of leaves and the murmur of water. The elders gathered beneath towering pines, weaving stories like threads in a vast tapestry, tales of courage, sorrow, and love passed down through generations. The spiral stones, smoothed by countless hands, reflected the dawn's soft light, standing sentinel over the legacy of those who came before. Leaf, the keeper of dreams, continued his sacred work, tracing visions in ash and soot, teaching others the language of the unseen. Alva's weaving had become an art form, each knot and twist carrying meanings understood only by those who truly listened. Though Brynja was no longer seen, her spirit lingered in the whispering woods and flickering shadows, a guardian unseen but deeply felt. Erna, once a quiet listener, had become the steady heartbeat beneath the village's breath. The pendants, the circle, and the wave rested close to her heart, symbols not of power, but of responsibility and connection. Her steps were soft but sure, her presence a balm to the community's soul. One crisp morning, as golden light spilled over frost-kissed fields, a figure appeared at the village's edge. Clad simply, her eyes clear and calm like river stones, she introduced herself as Liv, a seeker drawn by whispered tales carried on the wind. The villagers, guided by those who remembered, welcomed her warmly. Liv shared her knowledge with humility, blending her wisdom with the old ways alive in the village. Her voice, soft yet sure, added new hues to their shared tapestry. As autumn painted the hills in fiery hues, the village prepared once more to gather beneath the great pine and the spiral stones. Freya's flute sang softly, weaving silver threads through trees and hearts alike. Erna stood by the bowl at the circle's center, the pendants resting reverently in her hands. Her voice rose, naming the wise women who had come before, honoring their courage, their fears, and their love. The villagers listened in hushed reverence, their hearts resonating with the sacred chant. As the song faded and the fire burned brighter, shadows danced, past and future entwined beneath the vast night sky. The story paused, not to end, but to breathe, awaiting the next breath, the next step, the next remembering. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy and your breath slows, let the quiet strength of this place carry you gently into sleep. Imagine the soft flicker of the fire, the steady pulse of the flute's last note, and the eternal turning of the spiral, a circle without end, welcoming you home.